Sometimes the people we destroy are the ones who saved us first. King Aldrich spent 6 years worshipping the wrong woman, crowning a liar while the girl who bled for him scrubbed floors in silence. Now she stands in chains before his throne, about to die for treason she never committed, and he's still too blind to see the truth carved into her skin. This is the story of a king who had everything except the ability to recognize love when it wore scars instead of silk. Stay until the end, because what happens when he finally remembers will shatter you. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. The storm hit the northern mountains without warning, the kind that turned men into frozen sculptures before they could scream for help. Prince Aldrich was 17 and dying. He pressed his back against the cliff face, one hand clutching the wound across his ribs where the assassin's blade had found home. Blood soaked through his leather jerkin, freezing into dark crystals against his skin. His horse was 3 hours dead. His guards were scattered corpses in the valley below. The wind shrieked through the pines like a living thing that wanted him dead. He'd been running for 2 days since the coup attempt in the capital. His uncle's men had come in the night, slaughtered the loyal guards, set fire to the eastern wing of the palace. Aldrich had escaped through the servant quarters with nothing but his father's silver compass and a stolen blade. Now even those felt like cruel jokes. The compass needle spun uselessly in the magnetic chaos of the storm. The blade was too heavy for his weakening grip. His vision blurred. The trees multiplied and merged. He could no longer feel his fingers. Somewhere in the howling darkness, wolves began to sing. Not the distant kind, the close kind, the hunting kind. Aldrich tried to push himself upright, but his legs betrayed him. He slid down the rock face into the snow, gasping, tasting copper and defeat. This was how princes died in the old songs, alone and forgotten, food for scavengers, a footnote in someone else's rise to power. The wolf song grew louder. He fumbled for his blade with numb fingers, knowing it wouldn't matter. A boy with a sword was just meat that fought back for a few extra seconds. Then he saw her. She came through the storm like something that didn't belong to the natural world. A girl in a ragged wool cloak, hood pulled low, moving through the snowdrifts with the certainty of someone who'd walked these mountains since birth. She carried a makeshift torch that guttered and smoked in the wind. In her other hand, a woodcutter's axe that looked too heavy for her frame. She stopped 10 feet away, torch raised, studying him with eyes he couldn't quite see beneath the hood. Aldrich tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough that sprayed blood across the snow. The wolves were close now. He could hear them circling, staying just beyond the torchlight, testing the girl's resolve. She turned her back to him, faced the darkness, raised the axe. What happened next lived in Aldrich's memory like a fever dream he could never fully trust. The girl stood her ground as the first wolf lunged from the trees. She swung the axe with brutal efficiency, caught the beast mid-leap, sent it howling back into the storm with a broken jaw. The second wolf tried to flank her. She kicked the torch into its face, filling the air with the stench of burning fur and terror. 3 more came at once. She couldn't stop them all. The largest wolf got past her guard, went straight for Aldrich's throat. He tried to raise his blade, but his arm wouldn't obey. The wolf's jaws opened wide enough to swallow the world. The girl threw herself between them. The wolf's teeth found her shoulder instead of his neck. She screamed, but didn't let go of the axe. Swung it one-handed into the beast's skull with a wet crunch that ended the screaming from both of them. The wolf collapsed. The girl staggered, bleeding, but still standing. The remaining wolves retreated into the storm, deciding easier prey existed elsewhere. Silence. Just the wind and their ragged breathing. The girl turned to look at him. Her hood had fallen back. Blood ran down her neck, black in the torchlight. She was young, maybe his age, with a face that would have been plain in daylight but looked carved from stone and firelight in that moment. Dark eyes that held no pity. A mouth set in a grim line that expected nothing. She studied him like a problem that might not be worth solving. Then she bent down, grabbed his arm, hauled him to his feet with strength that shouldn't have existed in someone half dead from a wolf bite. "Come on," she said. Her voice was rough, unpracticed, like she didn't waste words often. "Village is 2 miles. You die here, you feed crows. You die there, at least you get buried." He tried to thank her, but she was already moving, dragging him through the snow with relentless efficiency. His feet barely touched the ground. She half carried, half dragged him through a forest that seemed to know her, trees parting like they owed her passage. Aldrich's consciousness came and went in stuttering fragments. He remembered a small cottage that smelled like wood smoke and dried herbs. Remembered her shoving him onto a rough wooden bed. Remembered her cutting away his bloody clothes with a knife that had gutted fish that morning. Remembered her packing his wound with something that burned like liquid fire. He screamed. She shoved a leather strap between his teeth, held him down with one hand while she worked with the other, her own shoulder still bleeding, ignored. Her face showed nothing, no sympathy, no satisfaction, just the blank focus of someone performing a necessary task. When she finished, she moved to the fireplace, built it up until the room glowed orange. Then she finally, carefully, peeled away her own torn cloak to inspect the damage the wolf had done. Aldrich watched through half-closed eyes as she cleaned the wound, packed it, wrapped it, all with the same detached efficiency. Only once did her face tighten with pain, just a flicker, quickly suppressed. She never asked his name, never asked why he'd been dying in the mountains. She pulled a second blanket from a chest, threw it over him, then sat down beside the fire with her back to him. Picked up a piece of wood and a small knife, started carving with hands that should have been shaking but weren't. Aldrich wanted to speak, but exhaustion pulled him down into dark water. He woke sometime in the deep night to find her singing. It was barely a song, more like a string of words set to a melody that sounded older than the mountains. She sang quietly, almost to herself, in a dialect he half recognized from the borderlands. Something about winter and wolves and the price of surviving when others didn't. Her voice cracked on some of the notes, but she kept going, like the song mattered more than its beauty. He tried to memorize it, but sleep took him again. When he woke the second time, gray dawn light filtered through gaps in the shutters. The fire had burned down to embers. The girl sat in the same position, still carving, though the wood had transformed into a small wolf's head, crude but recognizable. She noticed him watching. "You got a fever," she said without looking up. "Means the wound's fighting back. You'll live or you won't. Nothing I can do about it now." He found his voice. Rough and broken, but there. "Thank you." She shrugged one shoulder, the uninjured one. "You already said that. 4 times last night. Doesn't change anything. What's your name?" She hesitated. The knife paused. Then she went back to carving. "Celine, I don't need to know," she cut him off. "Better if I don't. You're running from something. Got the look." "The wound. You tell me who you are, I might have to lie about it later." "Rather not." He wanted to argue, but she was right. Naming himself would make her a conspirator, would paint a target on her back the size of the kingdom. So he said nothing. She finished the carving, turned it over in her hands, then set it on the floor beside the bed. "For luck," she said. "Old custom. You survive a wolf, you keep its shape close. Reminds you that teeth are always closer than you think." She stood, pulled her cloak around her shoulders, wincing slightly. "I got work. There's water by the bed. Bread in the basket. Don't leave. Storm's still bad, and you'll just die stupider than before." She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the latch. Aldrich spoke before he could stop himself. "Why did you save me?" Celine looked back at him. In the dawn light, he could see her face more clearly now. Sharp cheekbones, a scar above her left eyebrow, eyes that had seen harder winters than he could imagine. She was beautiful in the way a cliff face was beautiful. Unforgiving. Honest. Marked by survival. "Because you would have died," she said simply. "And I was there. That's all." Then she was gone. He spent 3 days in that cottage, drifting in and out of fever dreams while Celine came and went like a ghost. She brought him broth that tasted like venison and bitter roots, changed his bandages, kept the fire going, said almost nothing. Once he woke to find her mending his torn jerkin with rough stitches, her face drawn in concentration. The dried blood on the leather looked black in the firelight. She worked with the same efficiency she brought to everything, no wasted movement, no decoration. On the second night, his fever broke and he became aware enough to really see the cottage. 1 room, 1 bed. Dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a shelf with 3 cups, 2 bowls, 1 plate. A woman's life pared down to pure function. No luxury, no softness. Just survival. "Where's your family?" he asked when she brought him water. "Dead," she said. "Same as everyone's up here eventually." She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. On the third night, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The temperature dropped so fast the walls creaked. Celine checked his wound one final time, nodded to herself. "You'll make it," she said. "Wound's clean, fever's gone. Give it 2 more days and you can travel. I don't know how to repay you." "Don't," she said flatly. "I didn't save you for payment." "Then why?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because maybe someday someone will save me and not ask for anything either. That's how it works up here. You give what you can. You take what you need. You don't keep score because everyone dies in debt anyway." She wrapped herself in her cloak, lay down on the floor by the fire. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into sleep. Aldrich stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across the wooden beams. He thought about the girl who'd thrown herself between him and death without knowing his name, who'd bled for him, who'd given him her bed and taken the floor, who expected nothing. He thought about the silver compass in his pocket, his father's last gift. The only thing of value he still carried. Carefully, quietly, he pulled it out. Opened the case. The needle had steadied now that the storm had passed, pointing true north. The inscription inside read, "For Aldrich, so you always find your way home." He closed it, placed it carefully on the floor beside the carved wolf. In the morning, he would take half. Keep it as a reminder. Leave the other half for her. A piece of proof. A way to find each other again if fate allowed. But when morning came, everything went wrong. Aldrich woke to shouting outside. Men's voices. Horses. The distinctive clink of military gear. His uncle's soldiers had found him. Celine was already moving, throwing his jerkin at him, pressing a finger to her lips. "Back window," she whispered. "Forest path. Follow the stream north for 3 miles, then cut east. There's a monastery. They'll hide you." The front door shook under heavy fists. "Open up! Royal business!" Celine looked at him. Her face showed nothing but her eyes betrayed her. Fear. Not for herself. For him. He wanted to stay. To fight. To protect her the way she'd protected him. But she was already pushing him toward the back, and the training of 17 years overrode everything else. A prince survived. That's what mattered. Survival first. Gratitude later. He went through the window as the front door crashed open. He ran through the snow as men's voices filled the cottage behind him. He ran until his wound reopened and blood painted his trail. He ran until soldiers on horseback caught up with him 3 miles into the forest, and he realized Celine's directions had led them away from the cottage, giving her time to disappear. He ran until his uncle's remaining loyal guards found him first, the ones who'd been searching the mountains, who'd finally tracked the storm to its source. They took him south, toward the capital, toward safety, toward a future where he'd be king someday, and this would all become a story he told at winter feasts. But he never forgot. For 6 years, he carried the memory of a girl in a cottage who'd saved him for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. For 6 years, he searched the northern territories every chance he got, looking for her. For 6 years, he kept half a silver compass and a carved wooden wolf as proof she'd been real. And for 6 years, he never found her. Until the day he met Vivienne Vale. It was a garden party in the 2nd year of his reign. King Aldrich, 23 years old, hardened by war and politics, but still carrying the weight of a debt unpaid. The northern nobles had gathered to celebrate the spring thaw and negotiate trade agreements and pretend they weren't all scheming against each other. She appeared like something out of a dream. Vivienne Vale moved through the garden with the kind of beauty that stopped conversations. Golden hair that caught sunlight. A face that sculptors would weep to capture. A dress that probably cost more than Aldrich's first horse. She carried herself with perfect posture, perfect grace, the finished product of a lifetime of noble training. She approached him directly, which was bold. Most nobles sent intermediaries. "Your Majesty," she said, curtsying with textbook precision, "I've been hoping to speak with you." He should have been suspicious, should have noticed how calculated the moment felt. But she smiled at him with warmth that seemed genuine and said something that destroyed his defenses completely. "I've been wanting to thank you for the work you've done in the northern territories. The new roads, the winter supply stations. My family's holdings are up near the mountains, and we've heard stories of the villages you've helped rebuild. It's more than any king has done in 50 years. Something in her words triggered a memory. The northern mountains, villages, winter. His heart started beating faster. Do you know the area well? He asked carefully. She nodded. I spent time there as a girl. Wild country. Beautiful, but brutal. My father sent me to study the old ways, learn the borderland customs. I was there during the Great Storm 6 years ago. Terrible winter. So many people died. Aldrich's mouth went dry. You were there during the storm? She met his eyes. Her expression shifted into something softer, more vulnerable. I've kept this quiet for years, she said. But since we're speaking honestly, I was staying in a small cottage at the forest edge. There was a night when the wolves came. A young man wounded, dying in the snow. I couldn't leave him. The world tilted. That was you? He whispered. She looked down, color rising in her cheeks, the picture of modest embarrassment. I never knew who you were, not until later when I saw your portrait. I've thought about that night so many times, wondered if you survived, if I'd done enough. Aldrich felt something enormous shift in his chest. 6 years of searching, 6 years of carrying the memory of a nameless girl who'd saved his life. And here she stood, grown, transformed, more beautiful than memory could have captured. You saved me, he said. His voice cracked. I've been looking for you for 6 years. She smiled and it lit up the garden. Then I'm glad I finally found you. They talked for hours. She knew details that matched his memories. Spoke about the cottage, the storm, the wolves. She described his wound with unsettling accuracy. Mentioned the carved wolf, the old survival songs, the way she'd kept him alive with herbs and stubbornness. Every word felt like proof. Every smile felt like destiny catching up. By the end of the garden party, Aldrich was certain. This was her. This was the girl who'd saved him. Fate had brought them together again, and he wouldn't make the mistake of losing her twice. Within a month, Vivienne Vale was a permanent fixture at court. Within 2 months, she had his complete trust. Within 3 months, the real Celine Hart arrived at the palace gates looking for work, and nobody noticed her at all. Celine came to the capital because she had nowhere else to go. The northern territories were dying, slow and quiet, the way poor places always died. The winter supply stations the king had built helped, but not enough. Her cottage had burned down in a fire the previous spring. No family, no prospects, just the same choice that had driven 1 million girls before her toward cities and uncertainty. She'd heard the palace hired staff year-round. Good wages, clean beds, better than starving in the mountains. She didn't come looking for the prince she'd saved. She'd barely thought about him in 6 years. He'd been a moment, a choice. One night in a lifetime of nights where you did what needed doing and moved on. She didn't expect recognition. She didn't want it. She just needed work. The palace steward looked her over with the expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 desperate girls and would see 1,000 more. Can you clean? Yes. Can you keep your mouth shut? Yes. Can you follow orders without needing your hand held? Yes. Fine. You start tomorrow. Servant quarters are in the east wing. You'll be assigned floors and duties. Break anything expensive and we dock your pay. Steal anything and we throw you in the stocks. Understood? Understood. He handed her a plain gray uniform and a key to a shared room. Welcome to the palace. Try not to die of excitement. She took the uniform. Didn't smile. Died of excitement had never been her risk. The work was brutal but familiar. Selene scrubbed floors, hauled water, changed linens, emptied chamber pots. The task differed from her mountain life only in scale and tedium. Up there, you worked to survive. Here, you worked to make other people comfortable while they forgot you existed. She was good at being forgotten. She kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, did her job efficiently and without complaint. The other servants liked her well enough because she didn't gossip or cause drama. The nobles didn't notice her at all because servants were furniture that occasionally moved. She'd been working at the palace for 2 weeks before she saw him. King Aldrich walked past her in the eastern corridor, deep in conversation with his military advisors. He looked different than she remembered. Older, harder, the kind of handsome that came from good bone structure and better tailors. His crown sat easy on his head like he'd been born wearing it. Celine pressed herself against the wall as protocol demanded. Eyes down, invisible. He walked past without seeing her. She felt nothing. Why would she? 6 years ago, she'd saved a dying boy because that's what you did when someone was dying in front of you. It didn't create a cosmic connection. It didn't entitle her to anything. He'd become a king. She'd become a servant. Life moved in different directions, and that was fine. She went back to scrubbing floors. It wasn't until 3 days later that she saw the woman. Vivienne Vale swept through the servant corridors like a golden hurricane, trailed by handmaidens and leaving chaos in her wake. She was complaining about the temperature in her chambers, the quality of the breakfast wine, the incompetence of the staff. "You there," she snapped at Celine. "Yes, you. Are you deaf?" Celine straightened. "No, milady." "Then why are you standing there like a brain-damaged cow?" "I need fresh linens in the Western suite. The ones currently there smell like peasant sweat." "Move." "Yes, milady." Celine gathered fresh linens and headed to the Western suite, which turned out to be the most opulent set of rooms outside the king's own chambers. Everything dripped with wealth. Silk curtains, imported rugs, gold candlesticks. The kind of excess that could have fed Celine's entire village for a year. She stripped the bed efficiently, replacing the linens that smelled perfectly fine with fresh ones that smelled exactly the same. Vivienne returned while she was smoothing the corners, looked her over with cold assessment. "What's your name?" "Celine, milady." "You're new." "Yes, milady." "From the north, judging by your accent." "Yes, milady." Vivienne's eyes narrowed slightly. "Where exactly?" "Small village. Mountains. Gone now." "Burned?" Celine hesitated. "Yes, milady." "Pity." Vivienne's voice carried no pity at all. "The north is such a savage place. I spent time there once, years ago. Dreadful experience. Barely survived. But it made me stronger, I suppose. Taught me what real hardship looks like." Something cold moved through Celine's stomach. Vivienne walked to the window, looked out over the palace gardens. "His Majesty has a particular fondness for the Northern Territories," she continued. "Did you know that? He spent time there during the Civil War. Nearly died, from what I understand. Very traumatic. But he survived, thanks to someone who showed him unexpected kindness." She turned back to Celine, smiled. "That someone was me, of course. I found him dying in a storm, saved his life. He's been devoted to me ever since. Quite touching, really. He says I'm the only person who ever saw him as human instead of royalty." The cold in Celine's stomach turned to ice. This woman was lying. Every word out of her mouth was a lie wrapped in silk. But Celine said nothing, just nodded, finished with the linens, kept her face blank. "You may go," Vivienne said dismissively. Celine left. She spent the rest of the day scrubbing floors and thinking about the implications of what she'd heard. Some nobleman's daughter had convinced the king she'd saved his life, had built an entire fiction around a night that belonged to Celine, was using it to secure power and position. Celine should have been angry, should have marched straight to the king and exposed the lie, should have demanded recognition, justice, something. But what proof did she have? A memory, a story, the word of a mountain peasant against a beautiful noblewoman who already had the king's trust. She'd learned young that truth was less important than who told it, that power mattered more than facts, that girls like her stayed quiet if they wanted to survive. So she stayed quiet. Let the lie exist, went back to scrubbing floors. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. 2 weeks later, a servant girl disappeared from the western wing. Young thing, barely 16, who'd been assigned to Vivienne's personal service. Just gone one morning, leaving her few possessions behind. The other servants whispered about it, but nobody reported it officially. Girls disappeared from palaces all the time. Usually it meant they'd gotten pregnant or stolen something, or just decided servitude wasn't worth it. Then a second girl disappeared, then a third, all from Vivienne's service, all without explanation. The whispers grew louder. Some servants started refusing assignments to the Western Wing. The head steward noticed but did nothing because Vivienne was the king's favorite, and you didn't question the king's favorite unless you wanted to join the disappeared. Celine noticed because noticing kept you alive. She started watching, paying attention, tracking patterns. Vivienne's handmaidens always looked exhausted, flinching, like they'd learned to expect violence. Sometimes Celine caught glimpses of bruises beneath their sleeves. Once she saw a girl with a split lip who claimed she'd walked into a door. Nobody walked into doors that often. Celine knew abuse when she saw it, had seen it in the mountains. The way men treated women when they thought nobody was watching. The casual cruelty that came from power meeting vulnerability. The silence that followed because speaking only made it worse. She thought about reporting it, then thought about who she'd be reporting to. The king who trusted his beautiful savior. The stewards who served at the king's pleasure. The entire court that had already decided Vivienne Vale was beloved and untouchable. Her word against everyone else's. She kept watching, kept quiet, hated herself for it. Then one morning she was hauling water through the eastern corridor when she heard Vivienne's voice from around the corner, talking to someone. The tone was different than usual, less performative, more genuine, the voice of someone who thought they were alone. Celine slowed, pressed herself against the wall where the corridor turned. Listened. He's completely blind, Vivienne was saying. Believes every word. It's almost too easy. A man's voice responded, one Celine didn't recognize, low and oily. What about the girl? Which girl? There are always girls. The one who was asking questions. Dark hair, northern accent. Oh, her. Vivienne's voice turned cold. She's nobody. Just another servant. If she becomes a problem, problem. We'll handle it the same way we handled the others. The same way we handled the others. Celine's blood turned to ice water. The man spoke again. The king suspects nothing? The king, Vivienne said with audible contempt, suspects nothing because he's a sentimental fool who thinks love is real and debts can be repaid. He spent 6 years searching for a ghost. All I had to do was become the ghost. He gave me his trust, his court, his future. Soon, I'll have his throne, and he'll thank me for it until the moment I slit his throat. Celine stopped breathing. The man laughed. You're certain the compass will be enough? It has to be. It's the only physical proof from that night. Once I have both halves, the story becomes unshakable. I saved the king. The compass proves it. Anyone who says otherwise is a jealous liar trying to undermine me. Perfect. Footsteps approached the corner. Celine moved fast and silent, slipping through a servant's door just as Vivienne and her companion rounded the corner. Through the crack, she caught a glimpse of the man. Tall. Expensive clothes. A face she'd seen before at court functions. Some kind of minor noble. One of Vivienne's co-conspirators. They passed. Celine stood in the dark service passage, heart hammering, mind racing. The king was going to die. Vivienne was planning a coup. The compass was the key. And Celine had roughly zero power to stop any of it. She thought about going to the guards, dismissed it immediately. She'd have to explain how she'd overheard a private conversation. They'd ask why she'd been lurking. She'd have no proof. Vivienne would deny everything. The guards would arrest Celine for false accusations or espionage or just for being inconvenient. She thought about going directly to the king. That was even worse. She'd have to admit she'd lied by omission. That she was the real girl from the storm. That she'd known for weeks and said nothing. He'd want to know why she'd stayed silent. She'd have no good answer. He'd think she was trying to steal Vivienne's position, trying to con him, trying to get close to power. Either way, she died or disappeared. Either way, Vivienne won. Celine leaned her head against the cold stone wall and tried to think like the mountains had taught her. Survival first, sentiment never. What could she do with no power, no proof, no allies? Watch. Wait. Look for an opening. So that's what she did. For 3 months, Celine became a ghost in the palace. She took every shift near the western wing, volunteered for duties that put her close to Vivienne's chambers, memorized schedules, tracked visitors, eavesdropped on conversations whenever she could do it safely. She learned that Vivienne met with the same group of nobles every week, minor houses with major ambitions, people who'd been passed over for advancement under the current regime. They gathered in private rooms and spoke in careful code about renovations and investments and supply chains. But Celine understood what they really meant. Renovations meant military preparations. Investments meant bribes and bought loyalty. Supply chains meant logistics for a coup. She learned that Vivienne had been systematically destroying her rivals at court, spreading rumors, manufacturing scandals, turning the king against anyone who might question her. 3 noble families had lost favor in recent months. 2 advisors had been dismissed. 1 general had been reassigned to a remote posting. All of them had made the mistake of doubting Vivienne's story. She learned that the king was completely, devastatingly blind to all of it. Celine saw him sometimes in the corridors or at court functions, always with Vivienne at his side, looking at her with such complete trust that it hurt to witness. He was a good king, by most accounts. Fair, strategic, genuinely trying to improve the kingdom, but he'd built his entire emotional foundation on the belief that Vivienne was the best person he'd ever known, that she'd saved him not for power, but for pure human decency. The lie had become the cornerstone of his worldview. Destroying it would destroy him, but not destroying it would kill him. Celine didn't know what to do with that paradox. Then one night, everything accelerated. She was working late, finishing the floors in the eastern corridor, when she heard shouting from the king's private chambers. Not angry shouting, frightened shouting. "Something's wrong," a guard was saying. "The food! Check the food!" Celine dropped her brush and ran. She reached the king's chambers just as the royal physician rushed past her. Inside, King Aldrich was bent over a basin, vomiting violently. His face was gray. Sweat poured down his neck. His hands shook. "Poison," the physician said grimly, testing the wine now. Vivienne stood in the corner, face pale, hands pressed to her mouth in perfect horror. "Oh, gods," she whispered. "Who would do this? Who would dare?" She was good, Celine had to admit. The performance was flawless. Shock, fear, desperate concern. If Celine hadn't heard the conversation 3 months ago, she would have believed it completely. The physician worked quickly, forcing charcoal down the king's throat, administering counter-agents. Within an hour, Aldrich's color started returning. The vomiting stopped. His breathing stabilized. "He'll live," the physician announced. But it was close. Another 10 minutes, and we would have lost him. The guards immediately began investigating. They questioned the kitchen staff, checked the wine stores, searched for evidence of tampering. They found a servant girl dead in the wine cellar, 16 years old, throat cut. A note pinned to her chest confessing to attempted regicide, claiming she'd been part of a conspiracy to overthrow the king. The handwriting was shaky, terrified, obviously coerced. But the guards declared the case solved. A tragic assassination attempt by a disturbed servant, now dead, conspiracy ended. Celine knew better. She recognized the dead girl, one of Vivienne's recent handmaidens, one who'd looked increasingly terrified in the weeks before she vanished. Vivienne had poisoned the king herself, blamed a servant, murdered the servant to close the investigation, and positioned herself as the grieving, faithful companion who'd stood by him through attempted assassination. It was brilliant. It was monstrous. And nobody suspected a thing. After that night, Vivienne's influence doubled. The king, shaken by how close he'd come to death, drew her even closer, gave her more authority, more access, started consulting her on matters of state. Within weeks, she was sitting in on council meetings. Within a month, she had informal veto power over military appointments. The kingdom was being handed to her piece by piece, and the king was doing it gladly, thinking he was honoring the girl who'd saved him twice. Celine watched it happen with growing desperation. She had to do something, had to stop this. But what? She was nobody, a servant, a ghost. Speaking would only get her killed. Staying silent would end with the kingdom in Vivienne's hands and Aldrich dead. She lay awake at night in her shared room, listening to other servants snore, thinking about impossible choices. Then one morning she was cleaning the great hall when she heard her name. Celine Hart. The voice was male, official. A guard stood at the hall entrance, reading from a summons. "Report to the throne room immediately. You're wanted for questioning." The other servants went silent, stared at her. Celine's heart stopped. This was it. Vivienne had decided she was a problem, had manufactured some charge, was moving to eliminate her. The guard waited. Celine put down her brush, straightened her apron, followed him through the palace with legs that felt like wood. The throne room was packed. The entire court had gathered, nobles in their finest, guards at attention. The king sat on his throne with Vivienne standing elegantly at his right hand. Celine was walked to the center of the room, made to stand alone in a circle of silent judgment. King Aldrich looked down at her. His face was unreadable. "Celine Hart," he said formally, "you stand accused of theft, espionage, and conspiracy against the crown." The room tilted. Vivienne stepped forward. Her face was sad, disappointed. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but the evidence is clear. We found stolen documents in her quarters, communications with known enemies of the state. She's been selling information about palace security, about your movements, about the poisoning investigation. Lies. Every word was lies. But Viviane held up papers, letters, documents covered in handwriting that might have been Celine's if you squinted and wanted to believe it. I don't want to believe it either, Viviane continued, her voice breaking slightly. She seemed like such a quiet girl, but the truth is unavoidable. She's been working against you from the beginning. The king's face hardened. Why? He asked Celine directly. What did I ever do to you? Celine opened her mouth. This was it. Her only chance. She could expose Viviane right now. Tell the truth about the storm, about the cottage, about who really saved him. But Viviane's eyes met hers across the throne room. Cold. Certain. Daring her to try. And Celine realized she'd already lost. She had no proof, no allies, nothing but a story that sounded desperate. The king would never believe her. The court would see a jealous servant trying to steal a noblewoman's glory. Viviane had built this trap perfectly. Speaking would change nothing except how quickly Celine died. So she said the only thing she could say, "Nothing, Your Majesty. I did nothing." The king's face showed something that might have been disappointment. "Take her to the dungeons," he said quietly. "Schedule her execution for 3 days hence. Let it be known that treachery against the crown will not be tolerated." Guards grabbed her arms. The court murmured approval. Viviane smiled sadly and dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. And Celine was dragged from the throne room, finally understanding that sometimes surviving wasn't about fighting back. Sometimes it was about accepting that you'd saved someone who could never see you clearly enough to save you in return. The dungeon smelled like old death and human waste. Celine sat on the stone floor with her back against the wall, wrists raw from iron shackles, and tried to remember what hope felt like. 3 days until execution. 72 hours to exist in a cell barely large enough to stand in, surrounded by the echoes of people who'd died screaming. She wasn't afraid of dying. The mountains had taught her that death was just the end of struggling. What ate at her was the waste of it. She'd saved a prince who became a king who was now going to be murdered by the woman he loved, and Celine would die knowing she could have stopped it if she'd just been someone different, someone he would have believed. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. She didn't look up. Guards came twice a day with water and stale bread. The routine was the only thing marking time in the endless dark. But these footsteps were different, lighter, accompanied by the rustle of expensive fabric. A woman's voice cut through the silence. "Leave us." The guard hesitated. "Milady, I don't think—" "I said leave." The voice carried absolute authority. The guard's footsteps retreated. Celine looked up. Viviane Vale stood outside the cell bars, backlit by torchlight, looking like an avenging angel in a dress that cost more than Celine's entire life. Her face showed concerned sadness, the expression of someone visiting a sick relative out of obligation. She studied Celine for a long moment. Then she smiled. The mask dropped. The concern vanished, replaced by something cold and satisfied. "You look terrible," Viviane said conversationally. "Prison really doesn't suit you. Then again, neither did serving. You had that same defeated look when you were scrubbing my floors." Celine said nothing. "I wanted to see you before the execution," Viviane continued. "Make sure you understood how completely you've lost." She moved closer to the bars. "You know what's funny? I actually worried about you for a while. Thought you might cause problems. That northern accent, the timing of your arrival. But then I realized something. You're too broken to be dangerous. The mountains beat all the fight out of you before you ever got here." Still, Celine stayed silent. Viviane's smile widened. "Say something. Scream. Beg. Tell me how unfair this is. Give me something." Celine met her eyes, kept her voice flat. "You already won. What else do you want?" "I want you to know that he'll never remember you." Viviane leaned against the bars. "That's what eats at you, isn't it? You saved his life, and he doesn't even know you exist. After you're dead, I'll marry him, rule beside him, eventually kill him and take the throne for myself. And your name will be a footnote, a treasonous servant who got what she deserved." She pulled something from her pocket, a piece of carved wood. The wolf Celine had made 6 years ago in the cottage. "I found this in his private chambers," Viviane said, "hidden in a drawer with some old clothes and half a broken compass. He's kept it all this time like religious relics, proof of a girl who never existed." She turned the carving over in her hands. You know what the best part is? He thinks I made this. I told him I carved it to give him strength during his recovery. He believed me instantly. Celine's chest tightened, but she kept her face blank. Vivian tossed the carved wolf onto the cell floor. Consider it a gift, something to hold while they put the noose around your neck. She straightened, smoothed her dress. Goodbye, Celine. I'd say I'll think of you, but honestly, I'll forget you existed by tomorrow. She walked away. Her footsteps faded. The torchlight dimmed. Celine sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the wooden wolf. Then she picked it up, ran her thumb over the rough edges, felt the grain of the wood she'd carved with hands that hadn't shaken even after a wolf's teeth had torn her shoulder open. Something shifted in her chest. Not hope. Hope was for people who had options. This was something colder, cleaner. The same instinct that had driven her to stand between a dying prince and a pack of wolves, even though the smart choice was to let him die and save herself. She'd spent 6 years surviving by staying small, staying quiet, accepting that the world belonged to people like Vivian who lied beautifully and people like her got crushed under the wheels. But survival wasn't the same thing as living, and dying silent wasn't survival. It was just slow suicide. Celine closed her fist around the carved wolf and started thinking like the mountains had taught her. Not about what was fair, not about what she deserved, just about what tools she had and how to use them before they killed her. She had 3 days, a cell with a guard who changed shifts every 6 hours, and the knowledge that Vivian's arrogance had just given her the one piece of information that might matter. The king kept relics from that night in his private chambers, still carried them, still thought about them. Part of him remembered. Part of him was still looking for the truth even if he didn't know it. That was something. Maybe not enough, but something. The next morning, when the guard brought water, Celine spoke for the first time since her arrest. I need to send a message to the king. The guard laughed. You got some last words? Write them down and I'll make sure they burn with your body. Not last words. Information. About the poisoning. The guard's humor died. His hand moved to his sword. What information? Celine kept her voice steady. I know who really tried to kill him. I have proof, but I'll only talk to the king directly. The guard studied her. She could see him calculating. If she was lying, nothing changed. If she was telling the truth and he ignored it, he'd be the guard who let critical intelligence slip away. I'll pass it up the chain, he said finally. Don't expect nothing to come of it. He left. Celine waited. Hours crawled past. She dozed, woke, counted stones in the wall, held the wooden wolf, thought about all the ways this could fail. Then footsteps. Multiple guards, the sound of keys in the lock. The cell door opened. 4 guards stood outside, hands on weapons. You're being moved, one said. King wants to question you personally. They shackled her hands and feet, walked her through the dungeon corridors, up stone stairs that her legs barely managed, into the blinding brightness of the palace proper. Servants scattered out of their path. Nobles stared. Everyone wanted to see the traitor being dragged to her reckoning. They took her to a private audience chamber. Small. No windows. A single table with 2 chairs. The guard shoved her into one chair, chained her to it, then took positions at the door. She waited. The door opened. King Aldrich entered alone. He looked older than she remembered from the throne room. Tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight you couldn't put down. He wore simple clothes, no crown, nothing to indicate his rank except the way he moved like someone used to being obeyed. He sat across from her, studied her face. She studied him back. 6 years ago, he'd been a boy dying in the snow. Now he was a man who'd learned how to rule. But his eyes were the same, gray as storm clouds, sharp, missing nothing. You said you have information about the poisoning, he said. His voice was controlled. Neutral. No anger. No mercy. Just the tone of someone evaluating evidence. Celine chose her words carefully. I know who did it. I know why. I know what's coming next. Then tell me. Not until you answer a question first. His expression hardened. You're not in a position to make demands. I'm not demanding. I'm offering a trade. Answer one question honestly. If you do, I'll tell you everything. He leaned back, crossed his arms. Fine. One question. Celine took a breath. The night you almost died in the northern mountains. The storm, the wolves, the girl who saved you. What do you actually remember? His face shifted. Surprise. Suspicion. Anger. What does that have to do with answer the question or I say nothing and you execute me tomorrow and find out too late that I was telling the truth? They stared at each other across the table. Aldrich spoke slowly. I remember being wounded, freezing. A girl found me, brought me to a cottage, kept me alive for 3 days. When my uncle's men came, she helped me escape. What did she look like? You said one question. This is the same question. What did she look like? He hesitated. Dark hair, pale skin, young, maybe 17. That describes half the girls in the kingdom. What else? I don't know. He sounded frustrated. It was dark. I was delirious with fever half the time. She wore a hood, kept her face shadowed. Did she have any scars? A scar. His eyes went distant, above her left eyebrow, small, shaped like a crescent. Celine leaned forward. Anything else? Her hands. He was staring at nothing, remembering, rough, scarred, working hands, and her shoulder. The wolf bit her, left side, deep wound. She packed it herself, didn't even flinch. Celine reached up with her shackled hands, pulled aside the rough collar of her prison shirt, exposed her left shoulder. The scar was massive, jagged, the kind of damage that came from an animal's teeth tearing through flesh and barely missing the artery. It had healed badly because she'd had no proper medicine, no skilled physician, just mountain remedies and stubbornness. She watched him see it, watched his face go white, watched realization hit him like a physical blow. No, he whispered. Celine let the collar fall back, kept her voice steady. 6 years ago, you woke up in my cottage with a wound that should have killed you. I spent 3 days keeping you alive. When soldiers came, I sent you north toward the monastery and stayed behind so they'd waste time questioning me instead of chasing you. You left half a silver compass beside a carved wooden wolf. His hands were shaking. That's not possible. Viviane Vale is a liar who's been manipulating you since the day you met her. She heard the story, studied the details, convinced you she was someone she never was. And you believed her because you wanted so badly for the girl who saved you to be someone beautiful and noble instead of someone broken and forgettable. Aldrich stood up so fast his chair fell over. The guards moved, but he waved them back. His breathing was ragged. If this is true, if you're really, then why didn't you say something? Why stay silent for months? Because I'm a servant, and she's a noblewoman, and you're a king, and who would have believed me? Celine's voice cracked. I watched you fall in love with her lies. Watched her twist you into her weapon. I tried to find proof, tried to stop her. But she's better at this than I am. She's been playing this game her whole life, and I'm just a girl from the mountains who knows how to survive wolves. Prove it. His voice was desperate. Give me something Viviane couldn't have known. The compass. The silver one your father gave you. It has an inscription inside. For Aldrich, so you always find your way home. You broke it in half before you left. Gave me one piece, kept the other. He went completely still. Celine continued. You have a wolf-shaped scar on your right shoulder where the first wolf grabbed you before I pulled it off. The wound in your ribs was 3 inches long, curved like a crescent blade. You had a fever that broke on the second night. You sang part of a marching song in your sleep, something about iron roads and northern stars. Stop! His voice was hoarse. The cottage faced east. Single room, herbs hanging from the rafters. A chest in the corner with blankets. A fireplace with a crack in the back left stone. I carved the wolf while you slept because I needed something to do with my hands. You woke up twice and thanked me. The second time you tried to tell me your name and I stopped you. Aldrich pressed his hands against the table like he needed it to stay upright. His face had gone gray. If you're telling the truth, if Viviane is lying, then everything I've built, everything I've trusted, she's going to kill you. Celine's voice was flat. Matter of fact, she already tried once with the poison, blamed it on a servant, murdered the girl to cover her tracks. She's planning a coup, meeting with minor nobles who want power, building an alliance. Once she has enough pieces in place, you'll die in your sleep and she'll take the throne and nobody will question it because you handed her legitimacy. How do you know this? Because I've been watching her for months, listening, tracking patterns. I overheard her planning it. That's why she had me arrested. I was getting too close. He was silent for a long time, then, show me the compass. I don't have it. It was in my room, The guards probably threw it away with the rest of my things when they arrested me. Then we have no proof. The compass wasn't the proof. The scar is the proof. The memories are the proof. She couldn't have known half the things I just told you because she wasn't there. But she knew some of it. Enough to be convincing. Because she's smart. She studied you, learned your tells, asked careful questions, and built a story from your answers. But she doesn't have the details that matter. The ones you never told anyone because they were too private. Like what? Celine met his eyes. Like the fact that you cried. Second night, after the fever broke, you woke up shaking and told me you didn't want to die. That you weren't ready. That you had so much left to do. I told you crying was just water leaving your body, and it didn't mean weakness. That the mountains cried every spring and nobody called them weak. Aldrich's face crumpled. He sat back down, put his head in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I've spent 6 years in love with a ghost, given her everything, trusted her with the kingdom, and the real person was here the whole time. Celine said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like twisting the knife. He looked up. His eyes were red. Why did you save me? Because you were dying, and I was there. Same reason anyone does anything decent. It wasn't destiny. It wasn't love. It was just the choice in front of me. Do you hate me? She considered the question honestly. No. You're not responsible for being blind. She played you perfectly. I hate that I wasn't strong enough to stop her. I hate that she's going to win. But I don't hate you. He stood, paced, ran his hands through his hair. If I announce this publicly, say that Vivienne lied, that you're the real savior. Half the court will think I've gone mad. Her allies will claim I'm fabricating evidence. It'll tear the kingdom apart. Probably. But if I do nothing, she kills me and takes the throne anyway. Definitely. He turned to look at her. The firelight caught his face, highlighting the angles that had sharpened since he was 17. So what do I do? Celine leaned forward as far as her chains allowed. You stop trusting anyone. You start investigating quietly. Find proof of her conspiracy. Build a case so strong that when you expose her, nobody can deny it. And you do it fast because she knows I talked to you and she's going to accelerate her timeline. She'll know I suspect something. Then pretend you don't. You're a king. You've been playing court politics for 6 years. Play her the way she's been playing you. Make her think she's still winning. While really, I'm what? Setting a trap? While really you're buying time until you can prove what she is. He studied her. And what happens to you during all this? I imagine I still get executed tomorrow unless you find a reason to delay it. I can't just pardon you. That would make Vivienne suspicious. So don't pardon me. Delay the execution pending further investigation. Say you want to verify my intelligence claims. Keep me alive long enough to help you find proof. Help me how? You'll be in a cell. Then take me out of the cell. Make me part of your personal guard or a servant in your private quarters. Somewhere you can use me. I can't be seen getting close to you. It would raise too many questions. Then keep me in the dungeon and visit at night. I don't care about comfort. I care about staying alive long enough to watch her fall. They locked eyes across the table. Aldrich made his decision. You'll be moved to a private cell. Better conditions. I'll delay your execution indefinitely, citing ongoing investigation. If anyone asks, you're being kept alive as a potential witness. Nothing more. And then? Then we find proof. Together. Before she finds out and kills us both. He called for the guards, ordered them to move Celine to a higher security holding area reserved for political prisoners. Better food, clean water, a window. As they led her away, he spoke one more time. Celine. She looked back. I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing you, for what she did, for what I let her do. Celine held his gaze. Being sorry doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. The private cell was a palace compared to the dungeon. Actual bed, clean blankets, a small desk and chair. The window was barred but let in real sunlight. They brought her decent food 3 times a day, gave her clean clothes. It felt like a trap. Celine spent the first day just existing in the space, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Vivienne had to know something had shifted. The execution had been delayed without explanation. The prisoner had been moved to better quarters. Questions would be asked. On the second night, Aldrich came. He arrived after midnight, alone, wearing dark clothes that let him move through the palace without attracting attention. The guard let him in without question. Kings could visit prisoners whenever they wanted. He sat across from her at the small desk, looked exhausted. "I've been reviewing the evidence against you," he said quietly. "The letters, the documents. They're convincing. But they're also convenient. Too convenient. Every piece of proof leads directly to your guilt without any ambiguity. That's because she manufactured it." "I know." He rubbed his eyes. "I've seen real conspiracies. They're messy, contradictory. This is too clean. Someone with resources and access to official seals created it specifically to destroy you. Can you prove that?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it. I've started investigating her meetings, her associates, the servant who supposedly poisoned me. There are inconsistencies, such as the girl who died in the wine cellar. Her family says she was terrified in the weeks before her death, kept saying she wanted to leave Vivian's service but was afraid to ask. Then suddenly she commits treason and suicide? Doesn't track. Did you question the family? Sent a trusted investigator. Someone Vivian doesn't know. We're being careful. Not careful enough if you're visiting me directly. I'm being careful enough." He leaned forward. "The guards outside are loyal to me personally, not to the court, not to Vivian. I've made sure of it. Loyalty can be bought, not theirs. I've known them since I was 17. They were part of the group that found me after the storm. They helped me survive the Civil War. They owe me their lives several times over. Everyone has a price." "Maybe. But right now they're the only people I can trust besides you. You barely know me. I know you threw yourself between me and a wolf. That's more than most people would do. That was 6 years ago. People change. Did you?" Celine considered the question. "I learned to stay quiet, to make myself invisible, to survive by not being noticed. But underneath, no. I'm still the girl who couldn't walk past someone dying even when the smart choice was to keep walking." "Good." He pulled out a folded paper. "I need you to look at something." He spread the paper on the desk. It was a list of names. 24 nobles. Some Celine recognized from court functions. Others were unfamiliar. "These are Vivian's known associates," Aldrich said. "People she meets with regularly. I need to know which ones are part of the conspiracy and which ones are just social connections. How am I supposed to know that from a cell? You're not." He pulled out a second paper. "This is a transfer order. Starting tomorrow, you'll be assigned to serve in the royal private quarters as part of your continued cooperation with the investigation. You'll have access to the areas where Vivian operates. You'll be able to observe her meetings, listen to conversations, report back to me. That's insane. She'll recognize me immediately. She barely looked at you when you were a servant before. To her, you're nobody. And now you're supposed to be a broken prisoner grateful for better treatment. Play the part. Stay invisible the way you always have. She won't see you because she's trained herself not to see people like you. And if she does see me, then we're both dead." He met her eyes. "I'm not going to lie. This is dangerous. She's already tried to kill you once. If she realizes you're out of the dungeon and close to me, she'll move fast. But it's the only way to get the proof we need." Celine studied the names on the list. Thought about the risk, the insanity of walking back into Vivian's territory, the likelihood of failure. Then she thought about dying in a cell having changed nothing. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. The guards will escort you to the servants' quarters. You'll be given your uniform and your assignments. Act like you're terrified, grateful, desperate to prove your innocence. Don't give her any reason to look twice at you. And if I find proof, bring it to me immediately. We'll have coded signals. If you need to meet urgently, leave a mark on the east window of the Royal Library. I'll find you within 2 hours." He stood to leave, paused at the door, turned back. "Celine, why are you doing this? You could have stayed quiet, died quietly. Nobody would have blamed you for giving up." She met his eyes. "Because she said I was too broken to be dangerous. And I want her to be wrong." He almost smiled. Might have been the first real expression she'd seen from him. Then he was gone. Celine spent the rest of the night preparing mentally for what came next. She was walking back into the palace where Vivian ruled, where one wrong look or suspicious action would end with her throat cut in a dark corridor, where she'd have to serve the woman who'd destroyed her while pretending to be grateful for the opportunity. The mountains had taught her survival. Now she'd find out if they'd taught her enough. Morning came too fast. Guards escorted her through the palace, gave her a servant's uniform, gray dress, white apron, the same clothes she'd worn months ago before her life imploded. The head steward looked at her with obvious distaste. "You're the traitor who bought her way out of execution by ratting on her accomplices." His voice dripped contempt. "You'll work twice as hard as anyone else and you'll be grateful for it. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "You'll be assigned to the royal private quarters. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything you're not explicitly told to clean. And if I hear one complaint about your work, you go straight back to the dungeon. Clear? Clear." He handed her a list of duties, dismissed her with a wave. Celine made her way to the royal wing, heart hammering, trying to look meek and frightened instead of alert and hunting. The private quarters were quieter than the public areas. Fewer servants, more guards. Everything felt heavier here, more dangerous. She started with basic cleaning, dusting, sweeping. The mindless work let her observe without being obvious about it. She mapped the layout, noted which rooms connected to which, identified private meeting spaces, memorized guard rotations. On the second day, she saw Vivienne. The noblewoman swept through the corridor with her usual entourage. Celine pressed herself against the wall, eyes down, invisible. Vivienne walked past without a glance. It worked. Celine was a ghost again. Over the following week, she settled into the rhythm, cleaned during the day, observed everything, met with Aldrich late at night to share what she'd learned. She identified 3 of Vivienne's regular conspirators. Nobles who met with her in private rooms and spoke in careful code about preparations and timelines. She discovered Vivienne was funneling money to mercenary companies through intermediaries. She found letters hidden in Vivienne's chambers discussing military positions and strategic vulnerabilities. It was all circumstantial, nothing definitive, nothing that would hold up in court. But it was a start. Then on the 8th night, everything broke open. Celine was cleaning the small library adjacent to the royal chambers when she heard voices. Vivienne and someone else. Coming closer. She looked around frantically. No time to leave. Nowhere to hide except behind the heavy curtains by the window. She pressed herself into the shadows just as the door opened. Vivienne entered with the man Celine recognized. Lord Marcus Thorne, one of the king's senior military advisors. Someone who should have been loyal to the crown. They thought they were alone. "How long?" Thorne asked. 2 weeks, Vivienne replied. "Maybe 3. The pieces are almost in place. The king suspects nothing?" "Nothing. He's been distracted by the investigation into the servant girl. Thinks he's uncovering some conspiracy. Let him chase shadows. And the girl herself. Dead in a week. I'll arrange an accident in the dungeons. Guards will say she tried to escape. Problem solved." Celine's blood turned to ice. Thorne walked to the window. Looked out. Almost there. After 6 years of playing the devoted savior. Must be exhausting. "You have no idea." Vivienne's voice was sharp, smiling at him, pretending to care about his pathetic attempts at reform. Listening to him talk about honor and duty like they mean anything. But it's almost over. Once he's dead, I'll marry his cousin, legitimize the transition, rule through him until he's no longer useful. Then what? Then accidents happen. And I rule alone the way I should have from the beginning. They talked for another 10 minutes, discussed logistics, named co-conspirators, outlined the plan for Aldrich's assassination in clinical detail. It was everything, every piece of proof needed, and Celine was trapped behind curtains with no way to record it. Finally, they left. Celine waited 5 full minutes before moving. Her legs had cramped. Her heart was trying to break through her ribs. She had to tell Aldrich immediately. She slipped out of the library, took the servant passages to the east wing, found the royal library window, made the signal, then waited. 2 hours felt like 2 days. Finally, Aldrich appeared in the private study where they had agreed to meet. He took one look at her face and knew. "What happened?" "I heard them. Vivienne and Lord Thorne. They're planning to kill you in 2 weeks. They laid out the entire conspiracy, named names, gave details." His face went white. "Thorne? He's one of my most trusted advisors. Not anymore, he's not." She told him everything, every word, every name, every piece of the plan. When she finished, Aldrich was silent for a long time. Then, "This is enough. We can move against her now." "No." Celine grabbed his arm. If you move now, you'll spook the others. They'll scatter, deny everything, claim it was theoretical discussion. You need more than my word. You need evidence others witnessed. You need them to act so you can catch them in the middle of it. You want me to let them attempt the assassination? I want you to control the attempt. Set a trap. Let them think they're succeeding. Then spring it when they're too committed to deny involvement. That's insane. It's the only way to get them all at once. Otherwise, you'll spend the next year fighting off pieces of the conspiracy that survived. He paced, ran his hands through his hair. The stress was carved into his face. I could have stopped this months ago if I'd just listened to my instincts. If I hadn't been so desperate to believe, there's no time for that. She cut him off. We have 2 weeks, maybe less. We need to plan this perfectly. They spent the next 3 hours working out the details. Aldrich would pretend everything was normal. Keep trusting Vivian. Keep meeting with Thorne. Let the conspiracy think they were safe. Celine would continue gathering evidence, recording meetings, building the case. When the assassination attempt came, Aldrich would be ready, guards loyal only to him, evidence prepared. The entire conspiracy exposed in a single devastating move. It was risky. It required perfect timing. It meant trusting each other completely. "You're sure about this?" Aldrich asked when they'd finished. Celine met his eyes. "I'm sure that if we don't try, you die and she wins. Everything else is just degrees of risk." He nodded slowly. "Then we do it." Over the next 10 days, Celine became a ghost with purpose. She documented everything, memorized conversations, tracked movements, built a mental map of the entire conspiracy. She watched Vivian play the devoted companion, saw her touch Aldrich's arm with false affection, heard her voice concerns about his safety with manufactured worry. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and knowing what Celine knew, it was almost unbearable to watch. 3 times she came close to being discovered. Once by a guard who noticed her in a corridor she shouldn't have accessed. Twice by servants who asked too many questions. Each time she talked her way out with the right mix of fear and submission. Each time her heart hammered for an hour afterward. The tension was breaking her apart from inside. Then on the 12th night, Vivian summoned her directly. Celine was cleaning the great hall when a guard approached. "Lady Vale requests your presence in her chambers immediately." Every instinct screamed danger, but refusing would be more suspicious than complying. She followed the guard to the western wing, to the opulent chambers where this whole nightmare had started months ago. Vivian stood by the window, backlit, beautiful, deadly. "Leave us," she told the guard. The door closed. They were alone. Vivian turned, studied Celine with eyes that saw too much. "You're the girl from the dungeon, the one who supposedly had information about conspiracies." "Yes, milady. Strange how you went from facing execution to serving in the royal wing. Almost like someone decided you were more valuable alive than dead." Celine kept her voice steady. "I cooperated with the investigation. They decided to show leniency." "How convenient." Vivian moved closer. "What exactly did you tell them?" "Information about supply chain irregularities." "Suspicious meetings?" "Nothing specific." "Nothing specific?" Vivian smiled. Her hand moved fast, grabbed Celine's wrist in a grip that crushed bone. "Let me tell you what I think. I think you're not as broken as I believed. I think you've been watching, listening, reporting back to someone. And I think that someone is the king." Celine's heart stopped, but she kept her face blank. "I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me." The grip tightened. "I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching, like you matter, like you're someone important. And suddenly I'm remembering a girl from the mountains, a girl who should have died 6 years ago but apparently didn't." She pulled Celine close, whispered in her ear, "You're her, aren't you? The real girl from the cottage, the one who actually saved him." Celine met her eyes, said nothing. Vivian laughed. It was a cold sound. "Beautiful. This is perfect. I've been worried about phantom enemies, and the real threat was scrubbing my floors the whole time." She released Celine's wrist, shoved her backward. "Tell me. Does he know?" Celine's mind raced. Lying now would only make things worse. "He knows." "How long?" 2 weeks. "And you've been feeding him information?" "Yes." "What did you tell him?" "Everything." Vivian's face showed no emotion. Then she smiled. Thank you for being honest. It makes this simpler. She pulled a knife from her sleeve. Celine dove sideways as the blade carved air where her throat had been, crashed into a side table, rolled, came up fighting. Viviane advanced with the knife. No fear, no hesitation, just cold efficiency. You should have stayed quiet, she said. Should have died in that dungeon. But you had to be noble. Had to save him twice. Now you die anyway, and he still loses everything. She lunged. Celine grabbed a candlestick from the fallen table, swung it desperately, connected with Viviane's wrist. The knife flew across the room. They both dove for it. Viviane got there first, but Celine tackled her from behind. They hit the floor hard, struggling, clawing, fighting with the desperate violence of people who knew only one of them was leaving this room alive. Viviane was stronger, better trained. She rolled, got on top, raised the knife. Celine caught her wrist with both hands, held it, felt her strength failing. The blade descended inch by inch toward her heart. Then the door exploded open. Guards poured in, Aldrich behind them. Viviane froze. The knife hovered. Then she smiled, dropped the weapon, stood up, smoothed her dress. Your Majesty, she said breathlessly, thank the gods you're here. This woman attacked me, tried to kill me. I was defending myself. Aldrich looked at Celine on the floor, at Viviane standing over her with blood on her hands and perfect composure. Then he looked at the guards. Arrest Lady Vale. Viviane's composure cracked. What? No, you don't understand. She's the one. We heard everything. Aldrich's voice was granite. The room is wired. Every word you said was recorded. Every threat. Every admission. Viviane's face went white. You've been under surveillance for 10 days, Aldrich continued. Every meeting, every conspiracy, every lie. We have testimony from a dozen witnesses, letters with your seal, financial records showing payments to mercenaries, and now attempted murder of a crown witness. The guards moved in. Viviane didn't fight, just stared at Aldrich with something like admiration. You let me think I was winning, all this time. You played me. I learned from the best. His voice was empty. Take her to the dungeons. High security, no visitors, trial begins tomorrow. They dragged her away. Celine sat on the floor, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Aldrich knelt beside her, checked her for injuries. His hands were gentle. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. I'm sorry. I should have moved faster. Should have arrested her before she could corner you. You couldn't have known she'd figure it out. I should have been more careful. His voice cracked. I almost lost you twice now, both times because of decisions I made. Celine looked at him, really looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes, the guilt, the weight of everything that had happened. You saved me, she said quietly. Again. I think we're even. We're not even close to even. Then stop counting. She took his offered hand, let him pull her to her feet. What happens now? Now we finish this. He straightened. Tomorrow we put Viviane and her co-conspirators on trial. We expose everything publicly. We make sure the whole kingdom knows what she did. And then we rebuild. Fix the damage she caused. Try to create something better. Celine nodded, felt exhaustion settling into her bones. I'd like to attend the trial. You'll do more than attend. You'll testify. Tell your story. Let the kingdom hear the truth. She looked at him. The king who'd been a dying boy, who'd spent 6 years searching for a ghost, who'd almost been destroyed by beautiful lies. What if they don't believe me? They will. Because this time I'll be standing beside you, and everyone will know exactly who you are and what you did. He offered his arm, formal, a gesture of respect. Celine took it. Together they walked out of Viviane's chambers, down corridors that had witnessed months of lies and manipulation, toward a future that was finally starting to look like truth. But in the dungeons below, Viviane sat in her cell and smiled in the darkness, because a trial meant a public platform, an audience, a chance to speak. And she'd always been very, very good with words. The trial began at dawn in the grand hall, and the entire kingdom held its breath. Celine stood in the witness chamber, hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. Through the narrow window she could see the crowd gathering. Hundreds of nobles, merchants, common folk. Everyone wanted to watch the beautiful monster fall. A guard knocked. Time, milady. She wasn't a lady, would never be a lady, but protocol demanded the title for anyone testifying against nobility. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. She followed the guard into the hall. The space was massive, vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound, rows of benches packed with witnesses. At the center, a raised platform where Vivienne sat in chains, somehow still managing to look regal. Her golden hair caught the morning light. Her dress was simple gray linen, but she wore it like silk. Beside her stood her defense counsel, 3 of the best legal minds in the kingdom, hired by her family's remaining fortune. Across from them, the prosecution. Royal prosecutors who served at the king's pleasure, armed with evidence and testimony and the full weight of the crown. And above them all, King Aldrich sat on his throne, face carved from stone, watching everything with eyes that betrayed nothing. Celine was led to the witness stand, made to swear her oath on the kingdom's laws, promised to speak truth under penalty of death. The lead prosecutor stood, a man named Davos Kane, gray-haired and sharp as broken glass. He'd spent 40 years destroying liars in courtrooms. State your name for the record, Celine Hart. Your occupation, servant, palace staff. And before that, mountain villages, northern territories, wherever there was work. Davos walked slowly around the witness stand, building rhythm. 6 years ago, you lived in a cottage near the northern mountains. Is that correct? Yes. Tell us what happened there. The night of the great storm. Celine took a breath, forced herself to speak clearly. I found a young man dying in the snow, wounded, freezing, surrounded by wolves. I brought him to my cottage, kept him alive for 3 days. When soldiers came looking, I helped him escape. Did you know who this man was? Not at the time. He never told me his name. And later? Later I learned he was Prince Aldrich, now King Aldrich. Davos gestured toward the throne. Can you confirm that the man you saved was the king currently presiding over this trial? Celine looked at Aldrich, met his eyes. Yes, that's him. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Davos continued. During those 3 days, did the accused, Lady Vivienne Vale, have any contact with Prince Aldrich? No. She wasn't there. I was alone. Are you certain? Completely certain. Then how did Lady Vale come to claim she was the one who saved the prince's life? Because she's a liar who heard the story and decided to steal it for her own gain. One of Vivienne's defense attorneys shot to his feet. Objection. The witness is making assumptions about my client's intent. The head judge, an ancient woman named Magistrate Vren, waved him down. Overruled. The witness may characterize what she observed. Davos smiled slightly. Tell us about the evidence. The compass. The carved wolf. The details only the real savior would know. Celine recounted everything. The wolf-shaped scar on Aldrich's shoulder, the inscription in the compass, the survival song, the fever dreams, every private detail that Vivienne had claimed as her own. The crowd listened in absolute silence. When she finished, Davos nodded. Thank you, your witness. The defense attorney stood. His name was Marcus Fell, and he had a reputation for destroying witnesses through surgical precision. He approached Celine with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Hart, you've told us a compelling story. But stories are just that. Stories. Do you have any physical proof you were the one who saved the king? The compass was taken when I was arrested. How convenient. And the scar you mentioned? Many people have scars. That doesn't prove you gave it to the king. I also have the wolf bite on my shoulder, the one I got defending him, which you could have received from any wolf at any time. Fell's voice was gentle, reasonable. The mountains are full of wolves, aren't they? Yes, but... And this carved wooden wolf you claim to have made, where is it now? In the king's private chambers, where Vivienne stole it and lied about making it herself. But you don't have it. So again, no physical proof. The king can confirm the king is not on trial here. Fell cut her off. My client is. And you're asking us to believe that a noble woman of impeccable reputation fabricated an elaborate lie for 6 years, fooling the king himself, all to steal credit for something she didn't do. Does that seem reasonable to you? Celine's jaw tightened. It's exactly what happened. Or perhaps you're the one lying. Fell's voice sharpened. Perhaps you heard the story of the king's rescue and decided to insert yourself into it. Perhaps you saw an opportunity to elevate your station from servant to something more. Perhaps this entire accusation is nothing more than a desperate attempt to avoid execution for actual crimes you committed. That's not true. You were arrested for espionage and conspiracy, were you not? Yes, but I was framed, or so you claim. But the evidence against you was substantial. Letters, documents, testimony. And now, facing death, you suddenly produce this miraculous story about being the king's true savior. Remarkably convenient timing. Celine felt the trap closing. Everything she said sounded defensive, desperate, exactly what Fell wanted. No further questions, Fell said. Dismiss the witness with a wave like she was garbage. Celine stepped down, shaking with rage and helplessness. The trial continued. DeVos called witness after witness. Servants who'd disappeared from Vivian's service. Guards who'd noticed suspicious meetings. The investigator who'd found inconsistencies in the poisoning. Financial experts who traced money to mercenary companies. Each one built another piece of the case. But Vivian's defense tore into every testimony, found contradictions, questioned motives, suggested alternative explanations. They were good at their job. Better than good. They were artists of reasonable doubt. By midday, the trial had become a war of narratives. Then Davos called his key witness. Lord Marcus Thorne. The military advisor was brought in under guard, looking like he'd aged 20 years in 2 weeks. His uniform was stripped of rank. His hands were shackled. Aldrich's face showed nothing, but his knuckles were white on the armrests. Lord Thorne, Davos began, you served as senior military advisor to the king. Is that correct? Yes. Thorne's voice was barely audible. And you conspired with Lady Vivian Vale to assassinate King Aldrich and seize the throne, correct? A long pause. Then, yes. The crowd erupted. Guards shouted for order. Magistrate Vren slammed her gavel. When the noise died, Davos continued. Tell the court how this conspiracy began. Thorne spoke slowly, every word extracted like a rotten tooth. Vivian approached me 2 years ago. Said the king was weak, that his reforms were destroying the military, that the kingdom needed stronger leadership. She promised me a position in her new government if I helped her take control. What did she ask you to do? Gather allies. Identify loyal forces we could turn, prepare logistics for a coup, and eventually help arrange the king's death to look like natural causes or an accident. The prosecution entered evidence, letters with Thorne's seal, meeting records, financial transactions. Vivian's attorneys objected repeatedly, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then came Fell's cross-examination. Lord Thorne, he said quietly, you've admitted to treason. You're facing execution. The prosecution has offered you a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against my client. Correct? Yes. So you have every reason to lie, to implicate Lady Vale even if she's innocent, to save your own life by destroying hers. I'm not lying. But you could be. Fell walked closer. In fact, let me propose an alternative theory. You were the one planning a coup. You tried to seduce Lady Vale into joining you. When she refused and threatened to expose you, you decided to frame her, pin your crimes on her, use her as a scapegoat. That's not what happened. Can you prove it? Can you show us any evidence that Lady Vale was the architect rather than you? Thorne hesitated. The letters. The meetings. It's all documented. Documents you could have fabricated. Meetings you could have initiated and then claimed she led. Without her explicit confession, everything you've presented could be interpreted either way. It was brutal, effective. Fell was planting doubt in every word. The trial dragged on through the afternoon. More witnesses, more evidence, more legal maneuvering. By sunset, both sides had presented their cases. Magistrate Vren called for a recess until morning, when closing arguments would be heard. Celine found Aldrich in his private chambers after dark. He stood at the window, staring out at the city, shoulders rigid with tension. She knocked softly. He turned. How bad is it? She asked. Bad. His voice was hollow. Fell is good. He's created enough doubt that half the court thinks Vivian might be innocent, that this could be a frame job by actual conspirators using her as cover. But we have evidence, testimony, recordings, all of which could be interpreted different ways if you want to believe them. He rubbed his face. Truth doesn't matter as much as which story people want to believe. And Vivienne is beautiful, charismatic, beloved. The idea that she's a monster is harder for people to accept than the idea that she's being persecuted. So what do we do? Aldrich looked at her. We wait for tomorrow, hope the closing arguments swing opinion back our way, and prepare for the possibility that she walks free. That can't happen. But it might. Justice isn't guaranteed just because we want it. He turned back to the window. I've learned that the hard way. Celine stood beside him, looked out at the city lights. If she goes free, she'll kill you within a month. I know. And you'll let her? No. He met her eyes. If the trial fails, I'll have to find another way. Something outside the law. Something I'll hate myself for. Like what? Like making her disappear. Quietly. Permanently. The way kings used to deal with threats before we pretended civilization mattered more than survival. Celine heard the exhaustion in his voice, the weight of considering actions that violated everything he believed in. Power didn't protect you from impossible choices. Sometimes it just meant you had to make them with more people watching. Get some rest, she said quietly. Tomorrow will be worse. He almost laughed. It always is. Morning came cold and gray. The grand hall filled even faster than the day before. Everyone wanted to hear the closing arguments, to see how the story ended. Davos spoke first. He laid out the case methodically, evidence by evidence, witness by witness, built a narrative of systematic deception, manipulation, and murderous intent. Lady Vivienne Vale, he said, standing before the crowd like an avenging prophet, is a predator who saw an opportunity and seized it. She heard the story of a girl who saved a prince. She studied the details. She transformed herself into that girl, and she used that lie to gain power, destroy rivals, and plot regicide. The evidence is overwhelming. The testimony is clear. She is guilty of every charge brought against her, and she deserves the maximum penalty under law. He sat down. Then Marcus Fell stood. What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Fell spoke quietly, reasonably. He didn't defend Vivienne's innocence directly. Instead, he attacked the prosecution's certainty. We've heard a compelling narrative, he said, a wicked noble woman, a virtuous servant, a king torn between truth and lies. It's a good story, the kind people want to believe, but wanting to believe something doesn't make it true. He walked through the evidence, reframing each piece. The letters could have been forged. The testimony could have been coerced. The supposed conspirators could have been acting independently and pinning their crimes on Lady Vale after being caught. And most importantly, he said, we have no direct evidence that Lady Vale initiated any of this. No confession, no witness who can testify to her giving explicit orders. Everything we've seen could be interpreted as her being surrounded by conspirators who used her name and reputation for their own ends. He paused. Let the silence build. I'm not asking you to believe Lady Vale is innocent, he continued. I'm asking you to acknowledge that you cannot be certain of her guilt. And in our system of justice, uncertainty means acquittal, because it is better that 10 guilty walk free than one innocent be condemned. It was brilliant rhetoric. He sat down. The chamber buzzed with argument. Magistrate Vryn called for silence. The Judicial Council will now deliberate. We will return with a verdict within 2 hours. The judges filed out. Everyone else waited. Celine sat in a side chamber counting seconds. Aldrich was in his private room, also waiting. They weren't allowed to communicate during deliberation. Time crawled. Then finally, a bell rang. The judges returned. The crowd filed back into the hall. Celine took her place in the witness section. Aldrich returned to his throne. Vivienne stood before the judges, face calm, hands folded. Magistrate Vryn spoke. In the matter of the Crown versus Vivienne Vale, on the charges of conspiracy, espionage, attempted regicide, and fraud, the Judicial Council has reached its decision. The hall went silent. We find the evidence compelling but not conclusive. We find reasonable doubt regarding the defendant's direct involvement in the crimes described. Therefore, on all charges, we find the defendant not guilty. The hall exploded. Half the crowd shouted in outrage. The other half cheered. Nobles argued. Commoners screamed. Guards struggled to maintain order. Celine felt the floor drop out from under her. Not guilty. Vivienne had won. She watched as they removed Vivienne's chains. Watched her smile with practiced humility. watched her curtsy to the judges with perfect grace. Aldrich sat frozen on his throne, face white. Vivianne's defense attorneys surrounded her, shaking hands, celebrating their victory. Within minutes, she was swept out of the hall by supporters, treated like a victim who'd been wrongfully accused. Celine tried to push through the crowd, tried to reach Aldrich, but guards were already evacuating the hall, managing the chaos, keeping witnesses and spectators separated. She was pulled into the side corridors, lost in the surge of bodies. By the time she fought her way back to the royal chambers, it was too late. The door to Aldrich's private study was locked. Guards stood outside, faces grim. "What happened?" Celine demanded. "King's orders," one guard said. "No visitors. He's meeting with his senior counsel. I need to speak with him. Can't help you. Orders are orders." Celine wanted to scream, to break down the door, to make them understand that Vivienne was free and planning her next move and Aldrich was in immediate danger. But she was nobody. Just a servant, just a witness who'd been proven irrelevant. She turned and walked away, mind racing. If she couldn't reach Aldrich, she'd have to stop Vivienne herself. She made her way through the palace, keeping to servant passages, moving with purpose. If Vivienne was planning something immediate, she'd need to coordinate with her remaining allies, which meant a meeting, somewhere private. Celine knew all the private meeting spaces, had spent months mapping them. She checked 3 locations before finding what she was looking for. Voices from behind a closed door. One of them, Vivienne's. Celine pressed herself against the wall, listened. "The trial was a disaster," a man was saying. "Half the kingdom thinks you're guilty. Your reputation is destroyed." Vivienne's laugh was cold. "Reputation doesn't matter. I'm free. The king can't touch me without looking like a tyrant. And now I have the perfect excuse to disappear for a while. Let things settle." "Disappear where?" "My family's estate. Northern Holdings. I'll gather the remaining forces there, regroup, plan the next move without palace eyes watching. And Thorn? He betrayed us. Thorn is a dead man. I'll have him killed in his cell within a week. Make it look like suicide. One less problem. What about the girl? The servant who testified?" A pause. Then Vivienne's voice dripping with venom. "She's the only real threat. She knows too much, has too much credibility with the king. She needs to die. Tonight, if possible." "How?" "Doesn't matter. Poison, accident, knife in the dark. Just make it quiet and make it permanent." Celine's blood turned to ice. "I need to reach the king," she thought desperately. "Warn him. Protect him. Stop this." She turned to leave and walked straight into a guard. Not one of Aldrich's loyal men, one of Vivienne's. She recognized him from the meeting she'd observed, a co-conspirator. His hand clamped over her mouth, his knife pressed against her ribs. "Found your little spy," he called through the door. The door opened. Vivienne stood framed in lamplight, smiling like a satisfied cat. "Celine Hart," she said warmly. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You really are remarkably persistent for someone so powerless." The guard dragged Celine inside, forced her into a chair, bound her hands. Vivienne circled her slowly. "You almost won, you know. Your testimony was compelling, your evidence was solid. But in the end, what matters isn't truth. It's who tells the story better. And I've always been better at stories than you. You won't get away with this. I already have." Vivienne leaned close. "The trial is over. I'm acquitted. Legally untouchable. And you're about to disappear. When they find your body tomorrow, it'll look like you committed suicide out of despair over my acquittal. Tragic, poetic, perfect. The king will know you did it." "The king," Vivienne said with contempt, "is a sentimental fool who still wants to believe the best in people. By the time he realizes what happened, I'll be gone. And by the time he finds me, I'll have an army at my back and he'll have nothing." She nodded to the guards. "Do it now. Make it clean. I don't want questions." 2 guards moved toward Celine. She fought, thrashed against the bindings, tried to scream, but one guard clamped a hand over her mouth while the other prepared a cloth soaked in something chemical and deadly. This was it. This was how she died. After everything, after saving a prince, exposing a conspiracy, surviving a trial. She'd die in a locked room at the hands of people who'd never face consequences. The cloth moved toward her face. Then the door exploded inward. Royal guards poured into the room, Aldrich behind them. His face was fury carved from stone. "Release her," he commanded. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Now!" The guards holding Celine froze, looked at Viviane. She met Aldrich's eyes, smiled. "Your Majesty." What an unexpected visit. "I said release her." The guards dropped Celine, stepped back. Aldrich moved to her, cut her bindings with a knife from his belt. His hands were shaking. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." Celine's voice cracked. "How did you know?" "I didn't." He helped her stand, but I suspected Viviane would move fast. "So I had you followed. When my guard reported you coming here, I knew." He turned to face Viviane. She stood calmly, hands folded, still playing the innocent victim. "This is a misunderstanding. I was simply—" "You were planning my murder." Aldrich's voice was ice. I heard everything. This room is wired, just like the others. Every word recorded. Viviane's smile faded. "You're under arrest," Aldrich continued. "Again. And this time the charges include direct threats against the crown, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder of a witness. All spoken in your own voice. All recorded. All undeniable." Viviane looked at the guards around her, at the evidence collapsing, at the trap she'd walked into. Then she laughed. It was a genuine laugh, surprised, almost admiring. "You've learned," she said. "When we met, you were still that naive boy who thought honor and truth mattered. Now you're playing the game the way it's actually played. I'm almost proud." "Take her," Aldrich said to his guards. They moved in. Viviane didn't resist. Let them put chains on her wrists, chains on her ankles. But as they led her past Aldrich, she stopped, met his eyes. "You think you've won," she said quietly. "But you haven't. Because even now, part of you still loves the woman you thought I was. Part of you will always wonder if I could have been redeemed. That weakness will destroy you eventually. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But someday, someone else will use that same weakness against you, and you'll fall just like you almost fell for me." Aldrich's face showed nothing. "Get her out of my sight." They dragged her away. The room emptied until only Celine and Aldrich remained. He turned to her. The fury drained from his face, replaced by exhaustion so deep it looked like illness. "I almost lost you again," he said. "But you didn't. Only because I second-guessed myself, questioned my own instincts. If I trusted you from the beginning, none of this would have happened. All those months, all that suffering, your arrest, the trial. It was all preventable." Celine touched his arm. "You're human. You made mistakes. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. I'm a king. I don't get to be real. I get to be right, or people die. Then be grateful you were right this time. This time." He looked at her. His eyes were haunted. "But what about next time? What about the next beautiful lie? The next person who knows exactly how to manipulate my guilt and my gratitude? Viviane was right. This weakness will kill me. So fix it. How?" "By learning that not every debt can be repaid. That saving someone once doesn't entitle you to blind trust forever. That gratitude is not the same as love, and love is not the same as truth." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "How did you survive 6 years in the mountains without becoming cynical?" "I didn't survive by trusting people. I survived by trusting patterns, actions over words, consistency over promises. The mountains taught me that weather doesn't lie. Wolves don't pretend. Winter comes whether you're ready or not. People are the only things that hide what they really are. And yet you saved me anyway, knowing I was probably just another liar. No, I saved you because you were dying and I could help. That's different than trusting you." He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Not the ghost he'd been searching for. Not the symbol of his guilt. Just her. "Teach me," he said quietly. "Teach you what?" "How to see people the way you do. How to separate truth from performance. How to survive in a world where everyone wants something from you, and most of them are willing to lie to get it. That's not something you can teach. It's something you earn by being broken enough times that you learn what breaking feels like. Then help me not be broken by the next one." Celine studied his face, saw the boy who'd cried in her cottage, the king who'd nearly been destroyed by his own good intentions, the man who was asking for help the only way he knew how. "I can do that," she said. "But it means trusting me. really trusting me. Not because I saved your life, not because you feel guilty, but because I've proven through action that I'll tell you the truth, even when it hurts. Can you do that? I already have been. You just weren't ready to hear it. I'm ready now. We'll see. They stood in the empty room, both marked by scars, both surviving despite the odds, both trying to figure out what came next when the story you thought you knew turned out to be fiction. Outside, the palace buzzed with news of Vivian's second arrest. But in Aldrich's private chambers an hour later, something worse was unfolding. His senior council had gathered, 10 advisors who helped run the kingdom, military, financial, diplomatic, legal. Aldrich had called them to discuss Vivian's new charges and the fallout from the trial. What he discovered instead shattered what remained of his faith in human nature. Lord Chancellor Baron stood as the meeting began, cleared his throat. Your Majesty, before we discuss Lady Vale, there's a matter the council needs to address. The tone was wrong, too formal, too careful. Aldrich felt ice forming in his chest. What matter? Your recent actions regarding the Vale case have caused significant concern among the nobility. Baron's voice was measured. Arresting a noblewoman twice on the same charges, conducting secret surveillance, detaining her after an acquittal. These actions, while perhaps justified in your mind, set a dangerous precedent for royal overreach. She was planning my assassination. Aldrich's voice was steel. The recordings prove it. Recordings obtained through methods that violate noble privacy rights. Baron gestured to the other council members. Methods that, if applied to any other noble house, would constitute tyranny. Are you seriously arguing that I should have let her kill me to preserve her privacy? We're arguing that the rule of law matters more than one king's survival. Another counselor spoke. A woman named Saris Vane, head of the diplomatic corps. If nobles can be arrested, surveilled, and detained without proper judicial oversight, then none of us are safe. Today it's Lady Vale. Tomorrow it could be any of us who disagree with royal policy. Aldrich looked around the table, saw the same expression on every face. Not quite hostile, not quite supportive, just calculating. What are you proposing? Baron stood. The council has prepared a formal petition. It requests that Lady Vale be released pending a proper investigation under noble oversight, that all surveillance evidence be ruled inadmissible, and that the Crown submit to judicial review before taking any further action against members of the nobility. He slid a document across the table. Aldrich stared at it. You want me to release a woman who openly discussed my murder, allow her to walk free, and tie my hands from stopping her. We want you to follow the law. Baron's voice was firm. Even kings are not above it. The law was written before people learned to weaponize legal protections, before conspirators could hide behind noble rights while planning regicide, which is why the law exists. To prevent kings from becoming tyrants who justify every abuse of power as necessary for security. Aldrich felt the trap closing. Every word he spoke sounded like tyranny. Every justification sounded like the beginning of dictatorship. He looked at each council member. How many of you agree with this petition? 9 hands rose. Only one counselor kept his hand down. General Marcus Stone, head of the Royal Military, the oldest member, a man who'd served Aldrich's father. The silence was suffocating. Aldrich spoke carefully. If I refuse this petition, what happens? Then the council will be forced to convene a noble assembly, put the matter to a kingdom-wide vote. And if the nobility votes against you, they can legally strip you of certain powers, including the power to arrest nobles without noble court approval. So this is a coup. Just wearing legal clothing. This is a defense of constitutional limits on royal power. Baron met his eyes. You're forcing us to choose between you and the system. We're choosing the system, even if it means a guilty woman goes free. Even then, because the alternative is every noble living in fear that any disagreement with the crown could result in secret surveillance and imprisonment. Aldrich looked at the document. It was elegantly written, legally sound, completely devastating. If he signed it, Vivian would be released within days. The conspiracy would fracture but survive, and he'd spend the rest of his reign fighting enemies he couldn't legally touch. If he refused, he'd face a constitutional crisis that could tear the kingdom apart. Noble houses would choose sides. The military might split. Everything he'd built would collapse into civil war. There was no good choice, only degrees of disaster. He thought about Celine's words, trust patterns, actions over words, consistency over promises. The pattern here was clear. His own counsel was choosing legal theory over his survival, choosing the comfort of institutional process over the messy reality of existential threats. They weren't evil. They were just afraid of a king who'd proven willing to break rules to protect himself. And maybe they were right to be afraid. Aldrich stood, picked up the document, walked to the fireplace, and dropped it into the flames. The council erupted. "Your Majesty, you can't—" "I just did." Aldrich turned to face them. His voice was quiet, absolute. "Here's what's going to happen. Vivienne Vale will stand trial again, with new evidence, under new charges, with judicial oversight you helped design, but she will not walk free. She will not be given another chance to kill me or anyone else. The law, Aldrich interrupted, exists to create order and safety. When it's used to protect people actively trying to destroy that order, it becomes a suicide pact. I will not die to prove I'm a good king. I will not watch my kingdom burn to prove I respect noble rights. I will do what's necessary to survive. And if that makes me a tyrant in your eyes, then history will judge which of us was right." The council sat in stunned silence. "This is a mistake," Baron said finally. "You're choosing power over principle." "No, I'm choosing survival over performance. There's a difference. Not to the nobility, not to the people who will see this as the first step toward dictatorship. Then they'll have to trust that I'm better than that. And if they can't, then maybe I don't deserve to be king, but I'll be a living king figuring that out instead of a dead one who died proving I was noble." He walked to the door, paused. "Each of you has a choice. Stay on this council and help me rebuild trust through action, or resign and join the opposition. But if you stay, I need absolute loyalty. Not blind obedience. Loyalty. The kind that tells me when I'm wrong, but supports me when I'm right. Can you do that?" One by one, they nodded. All except Baron. "I can't," he said. "I've served the crown for 30 years, but I serve the institution more than the man. You're making a mistake, and I can't be part of it." Aldrich nodded. "I understand. You're dismissed with honor." Baron stood, gathered his papers, walked out. The door closed. The remaining council members looked at each other, at Aldrich, at the future they'd just committed to. General Stone spoke first. "I assume you have a plan beyond intimidating your own advisors?" Aldrich sat down, suddenly exhausted. "I have the beginning of one. Vivienne's second trial needs to be airtight, beyond any legal challenge. We need evidence so overwhelming that even her defenders can't create reasonable doubt. The recordings will be presented alongside corroborating testimony, physical evidence, and witness accounts that can't be dismissed as coerced." He looked around the table. "I need each of you to help build that case. Use every resource, every contact, every legal tool we have. Make it impossible for her to walk free." "And if we can't?" Saris asked. "If the evidence isn't enough? Then I'll make a decision I pray I never have to make, and you'll all be better off not knowing what it is." The meeting ended. Aldrich returned to his chambers to find Celine waiting. She took one look at his face and knew. It went badly. Half my council just chose legal theory over my life. One of my oldest advisors resigned, and I had to threaten the rest into compliance. He collapsed into a chair. "I'm losing control. Not through incompetence or weakness, just through the inevitable friction of trying to do the right thing in a system designed to protect the powerful from accountability." So, what now? Now we build an unimpeachable case against Vivienne. Something so strong that even her defenders can't argue against it. And if that doesn't work, Celine sat across from him, met his eyes. "If it doesn't work, you'll have to become what you're afraid of becoming. You'll have to use power without mercy, authority without restraint. You'll have to make her disappear in a way that can't be challenged or questioned. And you'll have to live with what that makes you. I don't want to be that king. Nobody wants to be that king. But sometimes survival requires becoming something you hate. The question is whether you can do it without losing yourself completely. How do you not lose yourself? You find one person who reminds you who you were before you had to change. One person who'll tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. One person who won't let you slide into monstrosity without a fight. She reached across the space between them, took his hand. I'll be that person, if you let me. Aldrich looked at their joined hands, a king's hand scarred by politics and warfare, a servant's hand scarred by survival and sacrifice, both marked by choices that couldn't be undone. He squeezed gently. Then help me not become a monster. I will. But you have to promise me something in return. Anything. When this is over, when Vivienne is dealt with, when the kingdom is stable, you have to step back and remember why you became king in the first place. Remember that power exists to serve people, not preserve itself. Remember that the boy who cried in my cottage was more human than any crown will ever make you. He nodded, unable to speak. Outside, night deepened over the capital. In a high-security cell, Vivienne sat in chains and smiled in the darkness, because she knew something they didn't. She'd already won the only victory that mattered. She'd proven that a good king could be broken by his own morality, that honor was a weapon anyone could use against the honorable, that the gap between justice and survival was where kingdoms fell. Aldrich would either become a tyrant to stop her, destroying himself in the process, or he'd stay noble and die by her hand eventually. Either way, she'd reshaped him into something lesser, and that was its own kind of victory. The second trial was scheduled for 3 weeks from the day Vivienne was rearrested. 3 weeks to build an unbreakable case, 3 weeks to convince a kingdom that their legal system hadn't failed, 3 weeks for Aldrich to hold together a government fracturing under the weight of choosing between justice and procedure. Celine spent those weeks doing something she'd never imagined she'd do. She became a hunter, not the kind that tracked animals through forests, the kind that tracked evidence through lies. She worked alongside Aldrich's investigators, following paper trails, interviewing witnesses, connecting patterns that Vivienne had spent years hiding. They found the servant girls who'd disappeared from Vivienne's service. Not all of them. 5 were dead, but 3 were alive, scattered across the kingdom, terrified to speak, but more terrified of staying silent. One girl, barely 20, had scars around her wrists from being chained in Vivienne's private chambers for days at a time. Punishment for minor infractions. Entertainment for Vivienne's cruelty. Another had watched Vivienne poison a rival noblewoman's wine during a dinner party 2 years ago. The woman had died. Everyone assumed it was her heart. Only the servant knew the truth. The third had been ordered to plant false evidence in a minister's office, evidence that got him executed for treason he never committed. Each testimony was devastating. Each one painted Vivienne as something beyond a political opportunist. She was a sadist who'd used her position to torture and destroy anyone weaker than her. But getting them to testify publicly was another battle entirely. The first girl refused outright. I speak against her and I'm dead within a month. I've seen what she does to people who cross her. I'd rather disappear than end up like the others. Celine sat across from her in a safe house on the city's edge. The girl's name was Maya, dark hair, haunted eyes, hands that shook whenever someone moved too quickly. She won't be able to touch you, Celine said. She'll be in custody, under guard, awaiting execution if we win. If you win? Maya's laugh was bitter. You already won once. She walked free. What makes this time different? This time we have evidence she can't explain away. This time we have witnesses she can't discredit. This time the king himself is overseeing every detail. The king trusted her for 6 years. Why should I trust him now? It was a fair question, one Celine had asked herself 100 times. Because he's learned what trust costs, Celine said finally. Because he's seen what happens when you believe beautiful lies. Because he knows that if he fails again, he dies, and everyone who helped him dies with him. That kind of motivation makes people careful. Maya studied her. You're the one who saved him, years ago, in the mountains. How did you know that? Everyone knows. It's all over the palace. The servant who was really the hero, the king who fell in love with the wrong woman. It's like something out of a tragic ballad. Except I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to stop a monster. Aren't they the same thing? No. Heroes get songs written about them. People who stop monsters just get to keep living in a world that's slightly less terrible. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then, if I testify and she walks again, you'll protect me? I'll protect you regardless of the verdict. Promise? Celine met her eyes. I promise on the scars she gave me when I was too stupid to stay quiet the first time. Maya slowly nodded. Okay, I'll testify. The other 2 survivors agreed for similar reasons. Not because they believed in justice, because they believed in Celine's anger, because someone who'd survived 6 years of invisibility and betrayal understood what it meant to be powerless and desperate for the powerful to finally face consequences. Meanwhile, Aldrich was fighting his own war. The noble houses were splitting into factions. Some supported the second trial, believing the new evidence justified it. Others saw it as royal overreach and were quietly gathering support for a constitutional challenge. Lord Baron, the former chancellor, was leading the opposition. He'd formed a coalition called the Noble Rights Council. Their position was simple. If a king could arrest, try, and retry a noble until he got the verdict he wanted, then no noble was safe. They had a point. It was a precedent that could be abused by future tyrants, but it was also the only way to stop a current one. Aldrich spent his days in meetings, negotiating with fence-sitting nobles, trading favors and concessions for their support. He gave up tax privileges, granted land rights, made promises about limiting royal surveillance powers in the future. He was buying justice with pieces of his authority. Every concession weakened the crown. Every promise tied his hands for future crises. But he made them anyway because the alternative was watching Vivienne walk free while his kingdom tore itself apart. "You're giving away too much," General Stone warned during one late-night strategy session. "Some of these nobles are bleeding you dry, taking advantage of your desperation." "I know." Aldrich's voice was flat with exhaustion. "But if I don't give them something, they'll side with Baron and we'll face a constitutional crisis that makes this trial look like a minor disagreement. There's a point where the cost of winning becomes indistinguishable from losing. Then we're already past that point, so we keep going and hope we can rebuild what we're breaking." Stone studied him. "You're changing, becoming harder. I'm becoming what I need to be to survive. There's a difference. Is there?" Aldrich didn't answer. 10 days before the trial, an assassination attempt found him in his own garden. He'd gone outside to clear his head, accompanied by 2 guards. It was late afternoon. The sun was setting through the palace walls, painting everything gold and crimson. The arrow came from nowhere. One guard shoved Aldrich aside, took the arrow through his throat instead, dropped without a sound. The second guard drew his sword, scanned the walls, searching for the archer. Another arrow. This one found the guard's eye. He collapsed. Aldrich dove behind a stone fountain, drew his own blade. His heart hammered so hard he could barely breathe. This was it. Vivienne's people were making their move. They couldn't afford to let him reach the trial alive. Footsteps. Someone approaching through the garden paths. Multiple someones. He counted breathing, tried to slow his pulse, remembered the training from his youth. Stay calm, assess the situation, strike when they expect weakness. The footsteps split, circling the fountain from both sides. Professional, coordinated. Aldrich waited until they were close. Then he moved, came around the fountain fast and low. His blade found the first attacker's thigh. The man screamed and went down. Aldrich rolled past him, came up facing the second attacker. This one was ready. Blocked Aldrich's strike, countered with a slash that opened Aldrich's shoulder. Shallow, but painful. Blood soaked through his shirt. They traded blows. Steel on steel. Aldrich was good, but he was a king who'd spent more time in council chambers than training yards. The assassin was a professional who killed people for money and had no other skills. The outcome should have been obvious. But Aldrich had something the assassin didn't. He had the absolute certainty that losing meant everyone he cared about died. That kind of motivation made you faster, stronger, willing to take risks that would horrify a sane person. He let the assassin's blade get close. Too close. It carved a line across his ribs, but it let him step inside the man's guard, let him drive his own blade up under the assassin's chin, through the soft tissue, into the brain. The man died instantly. Aldrich pulled his blade free, staggered, his vision swam, blood loss and adrenaline making everything blur. More footsteps. Running. His own guards this time, responding to the commotion. They found him standing over 3 bodies. 2 of his own men dead, 2 assassins neutralized. Blood everywhere. "Your Majesty." The captain of the guard looked horrified. "Are you injured?" "Nothing fatal." Aldrich's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "Secure the palace, find out how they got in, and get me a physician who can keep his mouth shut." They rushed him to his private chambers. A royal physician arrived within minutes. cleaned the wounds, stitched what needed stitching, wrapped him in enough bandages to outfit a hospital ward. "You're lucky," the physician said. "Another inch on that rib wound and you'd be dead." "Oh, moshikit." Aldrich almost laughed. Luck had nothing to do with it. He'd survived because desperation was stronger than skill. Word of the assassination attempt spread through the palace within hours. By morning, it had reached the entire city. The reaction split along predictable lines. Aldrich's supporters saw it as proof that Vivian's conspiracy was still active, still dangerous, still needing to be crushed. Baron's faction saw it as proof that Aldrich's aggressive tactics had destabilized the kingdom and invited violence. Same event. Opposite conclusions. That was politics in miniature. Celine found Aldrich in his chambers that night. He sat by the window, staring out at the city, bandaged and exhausted. She didn't say anything, just sat beside him. Let the silence exist. Finally he spoke. "I killed 2 men today. One with my own hands. I felt his blood on my fingers, felt his life end because I was faster, and I felt nothing about it. No guilt, no horror, just relief that I survived." "That's not wrong." Celine's voice was quiet. "That's being human. When something tries to kill you, feeling relief at surviving isn't evil. It's honest. But I should feel something, shouldn't I? Some remorse, some acknowledgement that they were people too, not just obstacles. They stopped being people when they took money to murder you. They made a choice. You made a different one. That's all." "Is that how you survive? By refusing to see your enemies as human?" "No. I survive by seeing them as exactly as human as me, capable of the same violence, the same desperation, the same willingness to do terrible things to stay alive. The only difference is whether you accept that or pretend you're better than it." He looked at her. "How are you not broken by that worldview?" "Who says I'm not?" She met his eyes. "I'm just broken in ways that let me keep walking. There's a difference between being destroyed and being damaged. One stops you. One just changes your shape." He reached out, took her hand, the same way she'd taken his weeks ago. Connection without words, acknowledgement without judgment. They sat like that until dawn light started creeping across the sky. 3 days before the trial, Baron's coalition made their move. They presented a formal petition to the High Court. It argued that the second trial violated Vivian's protection against double jeopardy, that the king was abusing his power to persecute a noblewoman who'd been legally acquitted, that the entire proceeding should be halted pending a constitutional review. It was legally brilliant, politically devastating, and perfectly timed to create maximum chaos. The High Court judges agreed to hear arguments, set a date for 2 days before the trial. If they ruled in Baron's favor, the trial would be cancelled, Vivian would walk free, and Aldrich's authority would be permanently crippled. "We need to win this hearing," Saris Vane said during the emergency council meeting. "If we lose, everything collapses." "How do we win a legal argument about constitutional limits when we're clearly pushing those limits?" another counselor asked. Aldrich leaned back in his chair. His wounds ached, his head pounded, and he was so tired of fighting battles on terrain chosen by people who wanted him dead. "We don't win on legal grounds," he said finally. "We win on moral ones. We make it clear that this isn't about noble rights or constitutional theory. This is about whether the kingdom protects murderers because they have fancy titles. The judges won't care about morality. They care about precedent. Then we give them precedent. We show them every case in the last 100 years where nobles were tried multiple times for the same crime when new evidence emerged. We prove this isn't unprecedented. It's just rare. And we argue that rarity doesn't equal illegality. That's a narrow argument. It's the only argument we have." Aldrich stood. His ribs screamed in protest, but he ignored them. "Prepare everything we can. Every legal citation, every historical case, every piece of evidence that shows Vivian's continued threat. We go into that hearing with such overwhelming proof that the judges would look like conspirators themselves if they rule against us." The council scattered to prepare. Celine found him afterwards. "You should be resting. You can barely stand. I'll rest when she's dead or I am. Not before. That's not sustainable. Survival rarely is. You either push until you break or you stop and get broken by someone else. Those are the options." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was burning himself out. that winning this way would leave nothing but ashes. But she'd lived in the mountains long enough to know that sometimes ashes were all you had left to build with. The hearing began on a cold morning with storm clouds gathering over the capital. The High Court chamber was smaller than the Grand Hall, but no less intimidating. Ancient stone, high ceilings, the weight of centuries of legal tradition pressing down on everyone inside. 5 judges sat in elevated positions. 3 were old enough to remember Aldrich's grandfather's reign. 2 were younger, appointed by Aldrich himself during his first years as king. Baron presented his case first. He argued with eloquence and precision, cited precedent, quoted legal scholars, built a narrative in which a well-meaning but desperate king was sliding toward tyranny, one small violation at a time. This case, he concluded, is not about Lady Vale's guilt or innocence. It is about whether we live in a kingdom governed by law or by the personal whims of whoever holds power. If we allow this second trial to proceed, we set a precedent that no acquittal is final, that any noble who displeases the crown can be tried repeatedly until the desired outcome is achieved. That is not justice. That is persecution dressed in legal clothing. It was compelling, dangerously so. Then Aldrich's lead attorney stood, a woman named Helena Vex who'd spent 30 years destroying impossible cases through sheer, relentless preparation. She presented the counterargument, laid out every historical case where new evidence had triggered new trials, showed that the principle of double jeopardy had exceptions when evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy emerged, argued that Vivian's recorded statements constituted new evidence substantial enough to justify legal action. But halfway through her presentation, she did something unexpected. She called Celine to testify. Celine hadn't been told this was coming, hadn't prepared, but she stood and walked to the witness position because refusing would look like weakness. "Miss Hart," Helena began, "you were present when Lady Vale made explicit threats against the king's life. Is that correct?" "Yes." "In your own words, describe what you heard." Celine took a breath, spoke clearly. "Vivian said I needed to die that night, that she'd have her people kill me and make it look like suicide. She said once I was gone, she'd disappear to her family's estate and regroup, that the king would be dead within months and she'd take the throne." The judges listened impassively. Helena continued, "And you believe these weren't idle threats? That she had the means and intent to act on them?" "I don't believe anything." "I know. Because 3 days after she said those words, assassins tried to kill the king in his own garden. 2 royal guards died protecting him. If not for the king's skill with a blade, he'd be dead now. That's not coincidence. That's a conspiracy in action." One of the judges leaned forward, an elderly man with a face like weathered stone. "How do we know you're telling the truth? You have obvious personal motivation to see Lady Vale condemned." Celine met his eyes. "You're right. I do have personal motivation. She tried to have me executed for crimes I didn't commit. She's tortured and murdered servants who couldn't fight back. She's manipulated a king and corrupted a kingdom for 6 years. So yes, I want her condemned. But that doesn't make my testimony false. It just means I have personal experience with what she's capable of." The judge sat back. Satisfied or unconvinced, Celine couldn't tell. Helena dismissed her, continued with the legal arguments, brought in expert testimony, built layer after layer of justification. When she finished, the judges deliberated for less than an hour. Then they returned. The head judge spoke. "In the matter of the constitutional challenge to the second trial of Vivian Vale, this court finds that sufficient new evidence exists to justify renewed legal proceedings. The principle of double jeopardy does not apply when a defendant's own recorded statements constitute admission of ongoing criminal conspiracy. The second trial will proceed as scheduled." Baron's face went white. Aldrich showed nothing, but Celine felt something shift in the air. They'd won the battle. Now came the war. The trial began 2 days later under unprecedented security. Every entrance to the Grand Hall was guarded. Every attendee searched. No weapons, no exceptions. The crowd was smaller this time. Fewer nobles wanted to be seen supporting either side. The political cost of being wrong had gotten too high. Vivian was brought in under heavy guard. She looked thinner than before, paler. But her eyes still held that cold calculation, that certainty that she'd find a way to win because she always did. The prosecution opened with the new evidence, the recordings of Vivian explicitly ordering Celine's death, her discussions with co-conspirators about timing the king's assassination, financial records showing continued payments to mercenary groups even after her acquittal. Then came the survivor testimony. Maya went first, described in horrific detail the torture she'd endured in Vivian's private chambers, the chains, the starvation, the casual cruelty administered for entertainment. The second survivor testified about the poisoning she'd witnessed, named the noblewoman who'd died, explained how Vivian had laughed about it afterwards, saying the woman had been too stupid to notice the bitter taste. The third described planting false evidence, watching an innocent man be executed, being told that mercy was weakness and weakness was unforgivable. Each testimony was devastating. Vivian's attorneys tried to discredit them, suggested they were lying for immunity, argued their stories were too convenient, too coordinated. But the survivors had something defense attorneys couldn't attack. They had scars, physical proof of torture, medical records showing injuries consistent with long-term abuse, evidence that existed independent of their words. The trial dragged on for 6 days. Expert witnesses analyzed the recordings, confirmed they were authentic, unedited, Vivian's actual voice making actual threats. Financial experts traced money through shell companies and intermediaries, showed a pattern of payments that coincided exactly with assassination attempts and political violence. Military analysts testified that the conspiracy had access to weapons, training, and personnel that only a well-funded operation could provide. Layer by layer, the prosecution built a case so comprehensive that even Vivian's brilliant defense team couldn't find gaps large enough to create doubt. On the 7th day, closing arguments began. The prosecution argued for conviction on all counts: conspiracy, treason, multiple counts of murder, attempted regicide. The list was long enough to guarantee execution if found guilty. The defense made one last desperate play. Marcus Fell stood before the judges and the crowd and delivered a speech about mercy, about how even the guilty deserved compassion, about how execution would make Vivian a martyr, about how exile would be justice enough. It was a plea for leniency dressed as philosophy. When he finished, the judges deliberated. This time, it took 3 hours, the longest 3 hours of Celine's life. She sat in the witness section, hands clenched, trying not to think about what happened if they lost again, trying not to imagine Vivian walking free, trying not to picture the moment when assassins finally succeeded in killing Aldrich. Then the bell rang. The judges returned. The crowd filed back in. Vivian stood before them, face calm, ready for whatever came next. The head judge spoke. In the matter of the Crown versus Vivian Vale, on all charges brought against her, we find the evidence overwhelming and undeniable. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of treason, guilty of multiple counts of torture and unlawful imprisonment, and guilty of attempted regicide. She is hereby sentenced to death by hanging, sentenced to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence. The hall exploded. Half the crowd cheered. The other half sat in stunned silence. Vivian's face finally cracked. The calm shattered. She looked at Aldrich with pure hatred. "You think this ends it?" she screamed as guards moved to take her away. "You think killing me stops what I started? I'm just one person. The system I built survives me. The people I corrupted stay corrupted. You won the trial, but you lost the kingdom. Get her out," the head judge ordered. They dragged her from the hall, still screaming, still promising destruction even in defeat. Aldrich sat motionless on his throne. He'd won. Vivian would die. Justice had been served. So why did it feel like losing? That night, Celine found him in the same place he'd been after the first trial, standing at his window, staring at the city, looking like a man who'd won a battle by burning down his own house. "She was right," he said without turning, "about the corruption, about the system. I spent so much time focused on convicting her that I didn't think about what comes after. How do I repair the damage she caused? How do I restore trust when I had to break constitutional norms to achieve justice? How do I govern a kingdom that's split between people who think I'm a hero and people who think I'm a tyrant?" One step at a time. Celine stood beside him. Just like everything else. That's not a plan. That's a platitude. Plans are for people who have clear paths forward. You're in uncharted territory, so you navigate by instinct and you correct course when you make mistakes. That's all anyone can do. He finally looked at her. "How are you so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm just used to living in situations where there's no good answer. You're not. You've spent your whole life believing that if you worked hard enough and thought carefully enough, you could find the right solution. But sometimes there is no right solution, just the least terrible option and the will to live with its consequences. That's bleak. That's honest. She held his gaze. You did what you had to do. You stopped a monster, saved lives, protected your kingdom. The fact that it costs something doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it expensive. And sometimes the price of doing the right thing is living with the knowledge that you're not as good as you thought you were. Is that what you tell yourself? To make the compromises bearable? No. I tell myself that survival matters more than purity, that being alive and imperfect is better than being dead and noble, that the world doesn't reward people for being too good to fight back. And then I wake up the next day and keep going because the alternative is giving up and letting the monsters win. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. Then, stay with me. What? Don't leave after this is over. Stay in the palace. Help me rebuild. Help me figure out how to be a king who's learned hard lessons without becoming the thing I fought against. I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. You've survived every test this world threw at you, and you're still standing, still capable of caring, still willing to fight. That's what I need. Not another advisor who will tell me what I want to hear. Someone who will tell me what I need to hear, even when it's ugly. Celine studied his face, saw the exhaustion, the damage, the determination underneath. All right, she said, I'll stay. But on one condition. Name it. You let me leave whenever I want. No obligation, no debt. If I decide this life isn't for me, you let me walk away without guilt or pressure. Agreed. He offered his hand. She took it. They shook on it like merchants closing a deal instead of two people who'd saved each other more times than they could count. Outside, the city prepared for an execution. 3 days until Vivienne hung. 3 days until this chapter closed and another began. But in her cell beneath the palace, Vivienne wasn't preparing to die. She was preparing for one last move, because she'd spent 6 years building a network, planting seeds, creating contingencies. And she'd always known that if the trial went against her, she'd need an escape plan. Her people were already in motion, bribing guards, loosening stones, creating chaos. And when the moment came, she'd be gone. Fled into the network of safe houses and loyal conspirators she'd spent years cultivating. Let them think they'd won. Let them celebrate their justice. She'd survive. Regroup. Return when they least expected it. Because that's what predators did. They adapted. They waited. They struck when prey thought they were safe. Aldrich had beaten her in court, but the real war was just beginning. 2 days before the execution, a servant brought Aldrich his breakfast. Nothing unusual. Same routine as every morning. The food was tested. The servant was one of his regular staff. Everything seemed normal. He ate without thinking about it. Toast, eggs, fresh fruit. Within an hour, he was violently ill. The royal physician was summoned, ran tests. His face went gray. Poison, he said. Same compound as before, but slower acting. You have maybe 6 hours before it kills you. Aldrich lay in his bed, sweating, shaking, feeling his body betray him. How? The breakfast. Had to be. But it was tested. Then the tester was bribed or the poison was added after testing. Either way, someone in your trusted inner circle just tried to murder you. Administer the counteragent. I am, but this dose is stronger than last time. I can slow it, but I'm not sure I can stop it. The room spun. Aldrich's vision blurred, his heart raced and stumbled and raced again. Celine burst through the door, looked at him, at the physician, understood immediately. No, she said. No, not now. Not when we're this close. She grabbed the physician. Is there anything else? Anything that might help? There's an experimental treatment. Risky, but it might work. I need rare herbs, equipment, time. How much time? 3 hours, maybe 4. And even then, I can't promise. Do it. Celine's voice was steel. Whatever you need, I'll get it. She ran from the room, screaming orders, sending servants scrambling, turning the palace upside down. Aldrich drifted in and out of consciousness, heard fragments of activity around him, felt hands working on him, tasted things that burned like liquid fire. At some point, Celine returned, knelt beside his bed, took his hand. You don't get to die, she said fiercely. You hear me? You don't get to die and leave me to clean up this mess alone. We have a deal. You stay alive and I stay here. You break that deal and I'll follow you into whatever comes after just to tell you what an idiot you are." He tried to laugh, coughed blood instead. The hours blurred together. The physician worked with desperate intensity. Forced treatments into Aldrich's body, monitored his vital signs, adjusted compounds on the fly. Celine never left his side. As dawn light started filtering through the windows, Aldrich's breathing finally stabilized. His color returned, his eyes focused. He lived. The physician collapsed into a chair, shaking. "That was too close. Another hour and we'd have lost you." Aldrich looked at Celine. Her face was streaked with tears she'd refused to admit were there. Her hand still gripped his like she was physically holding him in the world through will alone. "Who?" he managed to whisper. "Who did this?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out, and when I do, they'll wish they'd never been born." She stood, walked to the door, turned back. "Rest, recover. Let me handle this." Then she was gone. Celine moved through the palace like a storm given human form. She questioned the servant who'd brought the breakfast. The girl cracked within minutes, admitted she'd been bribed, terrified, said a man had threatened her family if she didn't add a powder to the king's food. Described the man. Celine knew him. One of the kitchen overseers, someone with access. Someone Vivienne could have corrupted years ago. She found him in the wine cellars, trying to flee, trying to disappear before anyone connected him to the attempt. She didn't give him the chance, grabbed him, slammed him against the wall, put a knife to his throat. "Talk, fast." "Who ordered it?" He spat at her. "Go to hell." She pressed the knife harder, drew blood. "You first." It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of escalating threats and promises of suffering. Then he broke. Lady Vale. She arranged it before the trial ended. Said even if she was convicted, she'd take the king with her. Said her people would make sure he died before she did. Where is she now? Has she escaped? Not yet. They're planning to break her out tomorrow night, before the execution. But the poison was supposed to happen first. Make his death look natural so there'd be no investigation. Who else is involved? He gave her 3 names. Guards, officials, people who'd been on Vivienne's payroll for years. Celine released him, let him collapse to the floor. "Thank you. You just saved your own life." She left him there, ran to find the captain of the guard. Within an hour, all 3 conspirators were arrested. Within 2 hours, they'd confirmed the escape plan. Detailed, elaborate, scheduled for the following night. Celine brought the information to Aldrich. He was sitting up now, still weak but alive, drinking something the physician had given him for the residual nausea. She told him everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We let it happen." "What?" "The escape attempt. We let it happen. Let Vivienne think she's succeeding. Then we stop it at the last possible moment. Catch her in the act with witnesses who can't be denied. End this once and for all in a way that silences every conspiracy theory about persecution. That's insane. If something goes wrong, then I die. Same as if we do nothing. But if it works, we destroy her completely. Not just execute her, prove beyond any doubt that she was guilty, that the conspiracy was real, that everything we've said was true." Celine wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too risky, too many variables. But she looked at his face and saw the same expression she'd seen in the mountains 6 years ago. The look of someone who'd accepted death and decided that if it was coming anyway, they might as well make it mean something. "All right," she said, "we'll do it your way. But I'm there when it happens. If this goes wrong, we go down together." He smiled. "First time in days, deal." They spent the next 24 hours preparing the trap, replaced the corrupted guards with loyal ones, staged positions along every escape route, prepared to document everything. And they told no one. Not the council, not the other guards. No one who might leak information or compromise the plan. Just Aldrich, Celine, and a handful of soldiers whose loyalty had been tested by blood. The night of the execution, Eve arrived cold and moonless, perfect for an escape attempt. Celine stood in the shadows near the dungeon entrance, watching, waiting. Beside her, Aldrich wore plain clothes and carried a blade, still weak from the poisoning but refusing to sit this out. This is it. he whispered. Either this works or... It works. Celine cut him off. It has to. They waited. Midnight came and went, then movement. Guards approaching the dungeon entrance, but walking wrong. Too casual, too confident. These were Vivian's people, wearing stolen uniforms. They killed the entrance guards quickly, professionally, then disappeared into the dungeon levels. Aldrich signaled his loyal soldiers. They moved silently, following at a distance, letting the conspirators think they were succeeding. Deep in the dungeon, they found Vivian's cell empty. The lock picked. The stones loosened. She was already moving through the escape route, guided by her people. Aldrich's soldiers followed, through secret passages, through abandoned tunnels, all the way to the city walls where horses and supplies waited. Vivian emerged into the open air, smiled, freedom within reach. Then Aldrich stepped from the shadows. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Vivian froze, looked around, saw soldiers everywhere, saw the trap close. Her face showed nothing. Then she laughed. "You're smarter than I thought. Gave me just enough rope to hang myself. Literally. It's over. Surrender and you die quickly tomorrow. Fight and you die messily tonight." She drew a knife. One of her rescuers had given her, probably planning to use it on Aldrich if the opportunity arose. "It's never over," she said. "Even if you kill me, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering which of your trusted advisors I corrupted. Which servants? Which guards? I've poisoned your entire world, and you'll never know how deep it goes. Then I'll tear it down and rebuild from scratch." "No, you won't. Because that would mean admitting you failed. Admitting you let a monster live in your house for 6 years. Admitting you're not the good king you pretend to be. You'll try to patch the cracks and pretend everything's fine. And eventually those cracks will kill you." "Maybe." Aldrich's voice was tired. "But at least I'll die trying to be better instead of living as something worse." He nodded to his soldiers. They moved in. Vivian could have surrendered, could have accepted defeat. Instead, she lunged at Aldrich with the knife. He sidestepped. Barely. Still weak. Still slow. Celine was faster. She intercepted Vivian, knocked the knife away. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and fury. For the second time, they fought like animals. All technique abandoned. Just desperation and hatred. Vivian got on top. Reached for the fallen knife. Celine grabbed her wrist, held it, felt her strength failing against someone younger and less damaged. The knife descended toward her heart. Then Aldrich was there. Pulled Vivian off. Threw her against the wall. Soldiers grabbed her before she could rise. It was over. Vivian hung limp in their grip, all fight gone, looking at Aldrich with something that might have been respect. "Well played," she said. "You finally learned how to be ruthless. Maybe you'll survive after all." "Get her out of my sight," Aldrich said. They dragged her back to the dungeons. This time to a cell with no windows, no weak stones, no possible escape. Celine stood slowly. Her body screamed, her hands shook, but she was alive. Aldrich looked at her. "Are you all right?" "No." She met his eyes. "But I will be. Tomorrow she hangs. This ends." "No." Celine shook her head. "Tomorrow she dies. But this doesn't end. She was right about one thing. The corruption she spread doesn't die with her. You'll be dealing with that for years. Then I'll deal with it. With your help. With my help." They walked back toward the palace together, through streets that were starting to wake, past citizens who had no idea how close their king had come to death. Again. Dawn was breaking over the capital. In a few hours, Vivian Vale would climb the scaffold. The noose would drop. And a monster would finally face the consequences she'd spent 6 years evading. But as Aldrich and Celine reached the palace gates, a messenger ran up to them. "Your Majesty." His face was pale. "We've just received word. There's an army marching on the capital. 3,000 men. Vivian's remaining loyalists. They're demanding her release or they'll lay siege to the city." Aldrich and Celine looked at each other. The execution was in 2 hours. The army would arrive in 4. And suddenly, the climax everyone thought was ending became the opening move of something infinitely worse. 3,000 soldiers marching toward the capital with demands that could only end in blood. 2 hours until an execution that would ignite a war. And Aldrich standing in his war room surrounded by maps and advisors, all of them looking at him for answers he didn't have. General Stone traced the enemy's approach on the map. They're moving fast, professional formation, well supplied. This isn't a mob, it's an army that's been preparing for months. Can we hold the city walls? Aldrich asked. Against 3,000? Stone's face was grim. Our garrison is 1,500 strong, good soldiers but untested in real siege warfare. We can hold for maybe a week if they commit to a full assault. But that assumes they don't have siege equipment. If they do, we're looking at 3 days maximum. So we negotiate. With what leverage? They're demanding Vivienne's release. You give them that, you look weak, and she goes free to rebuild her conspiracy. You refuse, they attack, and hundreds die in a war that shouldn't be happening. Cyrus Vane spoke up. There's a third option. We execute Vivienne immediately, right now, before they arrive. Remove the hostage from the equation. Force them to choose between retreating or attacking a city for no strategic gain. That won't stop them, another advisor argued. It'll enrage them, make them fight harder out of revenge rather than strategy. The room devolved into argument. Everyone had opinions. No one had solutions that didn't end in catastrophe. Celine stood in the corner, watching, saying nothing. She'd learned that power worked in strange ways. Sometimes the person without official authority saw clearest because they weren't blinded by the weight of making decisions that killed people. She studied the map, studied the positions, studied the way everyone was thinking about this wrong. They're not coming to rescue Vivienne, she said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. What? Aldrich asked. They're not coming to rescue her. Celine moved to the map. If they wanted her free, they'd have tried breaking her out weeks ago when security was lighter. They're coming now because they know she's about to die. Because they need something else. What else is there? Stone asked. Legitimacy. Celine pointed to the capital. Vivienne built a network that relied on her being the wronged victim, the woman persecuted by a paranoid king. If she dies quietly on a scaffold, that narrative collapses. But if she dies while an army is marching to save her, she becomes a martyr, a symbol. And her conspiracy survives her death because it's no longer about her. It's about the idea that the crown is tyrannical and must be opposed. The room absorbed this. So executing her now plays into their hands, Cyrus said slowly. But not executing her also plays into their hands. Either way, we lose, not necessarily. Celine looked at Aldrich. What if you give them what they want? Release Vivienne? He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. No, give them a trial, a public one, right now, in the city square. Let the people see the evidence, hear the testimony, watch her defend herself, then let them vote on her guilt. That's madness, Stone said. You can't put justice to a popular vote. Why not? Celine met his eyes. The people are the ones who'll die if this turns into a siege. They're the ones who'll suffer if the kingdom tears itself apart. Let them decide if she's worth that cost. If they vote guilty, she hangs with popular mandate. If they vote innocent, she goes free and you honor the result. Either way, the legitimacy question disappears. Aldrich stared at her. That's the most dangerous idea I've ever heard. It's also the only one that might work, because right now you have two bad choices. This creates a third option that's risky, but has a chance of ending this without mass death. The advisors erupted in objection. Too risky, too unprecedented, too much faith in common people to make complex legal judgments. But Aldrich kept looking at Celine, seeing something in her face that reminded him of a girl who'd stood between him and wolves without calculating the odds. How long would we need? He asked. 4 hours to gather the crowd. Present evidence. Take the vote. If we move fast. The army arrives in 4 hours. Then we finish just as they reach the gates. And when they do, they face a city united in its decision rather than divided by doubt. Aldrich looked around the room, at advisors who thought this was insane, at generals who thought it was suicide, at politicians who thought it was the end of civilized governance. Then he looked back at Celine, at the woman who'd taught him that survival sometimes meant making choices that terrified everyone, including yourself. Do it, he said. Gather the crowd, prepare the evidence. We'll hold the trial in the main square. And may whatever comes next prove I'm not the tyrant they think I am. The next hour was controlled chaos. Heralds rode through the capital announcing an emergency assembly. Citizens poured into the main square, confused and frightened. Thousands of them. Packed so tight that breathing became difficult. A platform was erected. Judges were summoned. Evidence was organized. Witnesses were prepared. And Vivian was brought from the dungeons in chains, looking at the crowd with an expression that might have been fear or might have been triumph. Hard to tell with her. Aldrich stood before the assembled masses as noon sun beat down on stone. His voice carried across the square, amplified by architecture designed for proclamations. Citizens of the capital, you know why you're here. An army marches toward us demanding the release of Vivian Vale. They claim she's innocent, that I've persecuted her out of paranoia and spite. Today, you will hear all evidence, see all proof, and you will decide her fate. Not me, not the courts, you. Because if this kingdom is worth defending, it's because the people have a voice in its justice. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion, uncertainty. This wasn't how justice worked. Kings didn't hand power to mobs. But Aldrich continued, I will present evidence of conspiracy, murder, and treason. Lady Vale's defense will present their counter-arguments. You will hear both sides. Then you will vote. Guilty or innocent, life or death. The choice is yours. And I swear on my crown that I will honor your decision regardless of outcome. He stepped back. The trial began. Helena Vex presented the prosecution's case. She moved through evidence with brutal efficiency. The recordings, the testimony, the financial records, the survivor accounts. She called Maya to the stand. The girl testified about torture with a voice that shook but never broke, showed her scars to thousands of witnesses who couldn't look away. She called the other survivors, each one adding their horror to the collective understanding. She presented the assassination attempts, the poisoned food, the corrupted guards, the escape plan caught in action. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of relentless, undeniable proof. Then Vivian's defense took their turn. Marcus Fell was brilliant as always. He couldn't deny the evidence, but he could reframe it. Suggest that Vivian had been surrounded by conspirators who'd used her name without her knowledge. Argue that being present at meetings didn't mean she'd organized them. Question whether the recordings might have been taken out of context. It was masterful misdirection, the kind that created just enough doubt to make people question what they'd seen. When both sides finished, Aldrich stepped forward again. You've heard everything, seen everything. Now the choice is yours. I will not influence you. I will not threaten you. I will simply ask that you search your conscience and vote for what you believe is true. He gestured to officials who moved through the crowd with voting tablets. Simple wooden pieces, white for innocent, black for guilty. Each citizen took one, held it, felt the weight of judgment in their hands. The square went silent. Celine watched from beside the platform. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack ribs. This was insanity, putting truth to a popular vote, trusting thousands of strangers to see past manipulation and fear. But it was also profoundly human. It acknowledged that justice didn't belong to kings or courts. It belonged to the people who had to live with its consequences. The vote began. Citizens approached collection urns, dropped their tablets. White or black, innocent or guilty, life or death. It took 30 minutes for everyone to vote. Then the count began. Officials emptied the urns, sorted tablets into piles, white on one side, black on the other. The piles grew. Celine couldn't tell which was larger. They looked almost even. This could go either way. Aldrich stood motionless, face blank, accepting that he'd given away his power and might have to honor a decision that freed his would-be murderer. Finally, the head counter stepped forward, raised his voice to carry across the square. The count is complete. 4,732 votes cast. By a margin of 320 votes, the verdict is guilty. The square erupted. Some cheered, some wept. Some stood in stunned silence. Vivian's face showed nothing. She'd played the game perfectly and still lost. There was nothing left but acceptance. Aldrich looked at her. Any last words? She smiled, bitter, genuine. Just one piece of advice. The people you just empowered with this vote, they'll use it against you someday. When popular opinion turns against your reforms, when mob mentality demands a scapegoat, you've proven that crowds can override the law. That lesson won't be forgotten. I'll deal with that when it comes. No, you'll die from it. Just like I'm dying from trusting that being clever was enough. We both made the same mistake. We thought we were smarter than the system. Turns out the system doesn't care how smart you are. It just grinds forward until you're dust. Then I'll die trying to make it better instead of living by making it worse." He nodded to the executioner. Vivienne Vale was led to the scaffold. The noose was placed. The crowd watched in absolute silence. She looked at Celine one last time, mouthed something that might have been, "You won." Then the floor dropped, and she fell and died. And the silence held for 3 long seconds before the square erupted in noise. Relief, anger, grief, everything humans felt when witnessing death as justice. Celine felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief. Just exhaustion and the knowledge that this solved one problem while creating dozens more. Aldrich stood beside her, watched the crowd disperse. His face was gray. "It's done," he said quietly. "No." Celine looked toward the city walls. "Now it begins." Because the army was still coming, and executing Vivienne hadn't made them disappear. The bells rang 4 hours after the execution, warning bells, the sound of imminent danger. 3,000 soldiers had reached the city walls, formed ranks, raised banners showing Vivienne's family crest. Aldrich stood on the ramparts with his generals, looking down at the army that had come too late. A herald rode forward, called up to the walls. "We are here for Lady Vivienne Vale. Release her immediately or face the consequences." Aldrich stepped forward. Let his voice carry across the space between walls and army. Lady Vale was tried by popular vote of 4,000 citizens, found guilty of treason, conspiracy, and murder. She was executed by lawful sentence this morning. Her body awaits burial. If you wish to claim it for her family, you may do so peacefully. But there is no hostage to release, no negotiation to be had. The herald rode back to consult with the army's commanders. 5 minutes later, he returned. "The commanders demand proof of death. They believe this is a trick." Aldrich looked at Celine Pochine. She nodded. "They brought Vivienne's body to the walls. Let the army see. Let there be no doubt." The herald looked up at the corpse, confirmed what he was seeing, rode back again. This time the wait was longer. Then the army began to move. Not attacking, dispersing, breaking formation, individual soldiers and small groups peeling away, heading back toward whatever homes they'd left to fight this war. Within an hour, half the army was gone. Within 2 hours, only a core group remained. Maybe 500 die-hard loyalists who'd invested everything in Vivienne's conspiracy. Their commander rode forward one last time, called up to Aldrich. "You've won today, but this isn't over. There are those of us who will never accept your legitimacy, who will never stop fighting what you represent. You'll spend the rest of your reign looking over your shoulder, wondering which advisor will betray you next, which servant will poison your food, which ally will put a knife in your back." Aldrich looked down at him. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life running, hiding, building conspiracies that collapse because you're fighting for a dead woman's vanity instead of something people actually believe in. I'd say I'll see you again, but honestly, I think you'll die alone and forgotten in some remote village, wondering why your great cause never amounted to anything." The commander's face twisted with rage, but he had no response, no threat that would land. He turned his horse, led his remaining loyalists away. The siege that never happened ended without a single arrow fired. Stone let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen a king do. "Probably both," Aldrich said. He looked at Celine. "Your plan worked. This time. Don't make a habit of gambling on crowd wisdom. You'll eventually lose." Noted. He turned to his generals. "Stand down from siege positions, but keep double watches for the next month. Some of those loyalists will be back for revenge. I want to be ready." Orders were given, soldiers dispersed, the crisis was over. But the damage remained. The next weeks were brutal in ways that had nothing to do with violence. Aldrich spent 16-hour days rebuilding trust, meeting with noble houses, negotiating with merchant guilds, reassuring foreign ambassadors that the kingdom was stable. He gave speeches about unity, about moving forward, about learning from mistakes. He established new oversight councils, reformed surveillance practices, created legal protections against the kind of abuse he'd employed to catch Vivienne.